On a quiet street in an old European city, the lodge looks like any other building. Its walls are ordinary brick, its windows darkened, its doorway unmarked except for a faint emblem carved into the stone. Hundreds of people may walk past it each day, never once suspecting that behind the silent facade lies one of history's most enduring mysteries. There is no sign, no flashing light, no obvious marker that tells the passerby that this is a place where secrets have been whispered for centuries. But those who have entered describe the moment as stepping into another world, a world of ritual, symbolism, and brotherhood bound together by oaths that cannot be broken. Imagine the door creaking open. The air inside is cool and heavy, as though the very walls are saturated with centuries of voices. Candles flicker, casting shadows that stretch across the chamber. In the center of the room lies a table marked with symbols that few outside the brotherhood understand. Men stand solemnly, their faces grave, their movements deliberate. This is not the chatter of a club or the ceremony of a church. This is something different, something older, something that has always insisted on secrecy. Throughout history, the mere idea of what happens inside these lodges has sparked fear, fascination, and suspicion. From the whispers of peasants who imagined devilish rites in the dead of night, to the suspicion of kings and popes who saw within Freemasonry a rival power, the closed doors of the lodge have invited endless speculation. Are they merely men practicing symbolic rituals meant to inspire virtue? Or do they hide something far more dangerous, a secret powerful enough to alter the course of history itself? Accounts from those who have been initiated describe a drama that feels like it belongs to another age. The candidate is blindfolded, led by the hand into the chamber. Strange words are spoken. Oaths are sworn upon pain of terrible consequences. A dagger may be pressed against the chest. The symbolism is overwhelming, designed to strip a man of his former identity and prepare him for rebirth into the brotherhood. And yet, for all the secrecy, for all the mystery, the precise details remain fragmented, contradictory, or lost. What is fact, and what is invention? What is harmless ritual, and what is hidden truth? This veil of uncertainty has made Freemasonry one of the most enduring enigmas in the history of secret societies. In every century, outsiders have tried to pull the veil aside. Sometimes they saw the Masons as revolutionaries, orchestrating the downfall of monarchs and the rise of republics. Sometimes they imagined them as occultists, preserving ancient Egyptian or Babylonian mysteries. Others accused them of darker things still, of devil worship, of conspiracies to corrupt faith, of alliances with forces beyond the understanding of ordinary men. And yet, despite centuries of accusation and exposure, the Brotherhood remains intact, still practicing rituals that outsiders can only glimpse in fragments. But secrecy is a double-edged sword. For those within, it creates intimacy, loyalty, a sense of belonging that transcends time and borders. For those outside, it breeds fear, mistrust, and endless speculation. A door that never opens becomes a mirror for the imagination. People see in Freemasonry what they most fear, or what they most desire. To some, the lodge is a place of enlightenment, a temple of morality where men refine themselves through allegory and ritual. To others, it is a cabal of shadowy power brokers, plotting in candlelight while the world above sleeps. Consider how different the world would appear to an initiate standing in that candlelit chamber for the first time. The symbols that line the walls are not arbitrary decorations. The square, the compass, the all-seeing eye, these are tools that speak to hidden truths, lessons that are never spoken aloud but must be grasped through ritual experience. The very act of initiation becomes a form of transformation. And yet, these are things that no outsider can truly feel, because to be initiated is to step into a story that has been rehearsed for centuries. The outsider can only guess, imagine, and wonder. It is perhaps this mixture of the ordinary and the extraordinary that makes Freemasonry so compelling. The lodge is not hidden in the mountains or deep in the forests. It stands right there, in plain sight, in cities and towns across the world. And yet, the ordinary brick walls conceal an inner sanctum that cannot be reached without swearing secrecy and surrendering to ritual. The mystery is not in some far-off temple, but in the building next door, and that makes it all the more unsettling. And so, the story begins not with answers, but with questions. What truly lies behind the oaths and the symbols? What happens when the blindfold comes off and a new initiate sees the lodge for the first time? Are these ceremonies echoes of forgotten ancient mysteries, preserved through centuries under the guise of brotherhood? Or are they carefully constructed illusions, rituals designed not to reveal, but to conceal? The Freemasons themselves insist that their secrets are symbolic, that their rituals are allegories designed to teach morality, brotherhood, and self-discipline. Yet, even those explanations raise more questions than they answer. Why such elaborate secrecy for something so benign? Why the threats of dire consequences for betrayal? Why has the brotherhood endured, century after century, while so many other societies have withered away? We are left standing before the door that never opens. Behind it, there may be only rituals of light and symbolism, harmless in their intent. Or there may be deeper truths, guarded for reasons the world has long forgotten. To understand, we must look back to the origins of the brotherhood, to the builders of cathedrals and the keepers of trade secrets, to the shifting tides of power and belief that transformed a guild of craftsmen into one of the most mysterious societies in human history. And so, our journey begins here, at the threshold of secrecy, before a door that has invited speculation for centuries. Beyond it lies a story of ritual, of power, of suspicion, and of revelation. The question remains, what truly happens inside? Long before the modern image of the Freemasons, men in suits gathering in discreet halls, there were only rumors. Whispers spread in taverns, in courtrooms, and in church pulpits about strange societies meeting in the dead of night. In the 16th and 17th centuries, when Europe trembled with wars of religion and kingdoms reshaped themselves through blood and fire, secrecy was both dangerous and alluring. To be part of something hidden, something whispered, meant power. And where there is secrecy, the imagination of outsiders always runs wild. In smoky taverns of London, in the wooden halls of Edinburgh, and in the crowded markets of Paris, rumors drifted. Men claimed they had seen gatherings by torchlight, where oaths were sworn and arcane symbols carved into tables. Others spoke of men of influence disappearing into quiet rooms and re-emerging with alliances stronger than law or crown could enforce. The whispers painted a picture of something more than a guild, something more than a brotherhood. The story of Freemasonry was already being written, not by its members, but by those on the outside who feared or envied it. It is telling that these early centuries were obsessed with secrets. The world was shifting, monarchs rose and fell, scientists unveiled truths that shook the foundations of faith, and explorers returned from distant lands with knowledge and treasures that rewrote maps. To common people, the unknown was everywhere, and into this world of change the Masons stepped, cloaked in ritual and silence. If an ordinary man could not understand the mysteries of the cosmos, perhaps his neighbor who vanished into a secret lodge held those answers. The less that was said about Freemasonry, the more its reputation grew. By the 17th century, Freemasonry began to attract not just stonemasons but scholars, philosophers, and noblemen. This was the era of secret clubs and private societies, when new ideas could be explored outside the scrutiny of church or state. But unlike other groups that rose and fell with the times, the Masons endured, and their endurance added to the whispers. Why did they survive when others vanished? What secret did they carry that made them stronger than kings and more feared than armies? Pamphlets from the time reveal the intensity of suspicion. Some accused the Freemasons of being atheists, of conspiring against church and monarchy alike. Others painted them as keepers of forbidden wisdom, guardians of ancient Egyptian or Solomonic mysteries. The truth, hidden behind closed doors, was that the rituals were still evolving, borrowing from old guild traditions, biblical allegory, and the theatrical style of the age. But outsiders did not know that. To them, every rumor of a strange ceremony, every whisper of a hidden oath, confirmed the sense that something powerful and dangerous was unfolding. Whispers traveled quickly in this era. A single accusation could ignite fear in entire towns. When masons were seen meeting late at night with candles and strange tools, people wondered if witchcraft was at play. When noblemen and merchants flocked to their lodges, others suspected political plotting. When revolutionaries and intellectuals joined, the imagination of enemies painted Freemasonry as the invisible hand guiding all upheaval. In every case, the lack of explanation was more terrifying than the truth might have been. Silence became their greatest shield and their greatest weapon. Kings and popes could not ignore such whispers. Rulers feared secret gatherings of men they could not control, especially when those men spanned classes, from working craftsmen to influential nobles. A society that mixed ranks and erased lines of birth was dangerous in a world built on hierarchy. And so, suspicion hardened into paranoia. Papal bulls denounced the Masons, kings outlawed them, and writers accused them of plotting the collapse of civilization itself. But each condemnation only deepened the allure. What kind of society could inspire such fear in the most powerful men of Europe? The secrecy itself became a myth-making machine. Outsiders imagined Freemasonry as vast, coordinated, and all-powerful, even when in reality lodges often worked independently and struggled with disputes among themselves. But perception matters more than truth in the world of power. The idea that Masons could shape governments, topple monarchs, and guide revolutions began as rumor, yet would become part of their legend. Whether or not they truly held that power, the world believed they might. And belief is often stronger than fact. For the initiate standing at the threshold of a lodge, however, the whispers of the outside world mattered little. What he encountered was ritual, fraternity, and mystery. Yet even within, questions lingered. Did these rituals truly connect to ancient wisdom, or were they symbolic inventions of recent centuries? Were they harmless allegories, or masks concealing something deeper? Members themselves could not always answer. The line between symbol and truth blurred, leaving even the initiated wondering just how far the secrets went. From the perspective of history, the whispers that trailed Freemasonry through the ages are as important as the rituals themselves. They shaped how outsiders viewed the brotherhood and how the brotherhood viewed itself. To survive, the Masons leaned into the very secrecy that endangered them. Their silence became their identity. Their rituals became stories told and retold in whispers. And every generation added its own interpretation, revolutionary, occult, conspiratorial, until the Masons were no longer just a brotherhood, but a canvas for the fears and hopes of society itself. As the centuries passed, the whispers grew louder. By the dawn of the 18th century, Freemasonry was no longer just a guild or private club. It had become a movement spreading across Europe and beyond, with lodges in cities from Paris to Philadelphia. The secrecy remained, but now it carried with it the weight of influence. Outsiders no longer wondered only about hidden ceremonies. They wondered whether Freemasonry itself was a hidden hand guiding the age. The whispers had birthed a legend. The lodge was now seen as both temple and threat, a place where light and shadow merged. Some imagined it as a sanctuary of enlightenment, others as a nest of conspirators. And the truth, tangled somewhere between the two, would only grow harder to uncover as Freemasonry's reach spread. It is here that our story moves from rumor to reality, from whispers to the tangible foundations of the Brotherhood. For if one wishes to understand the secrets of the Freemasons, one must first understand their beginnings. The builders of stone, the keepers of craft, and the first guardians of symbols that would one day be whispered of as secrets of the ages. To understand the Brotherhood, we must first return to the Middle Ages, to a time when Europe was a continent of stone. Castles, bridges, and, above all, cathedrals rose skyward, their spires piercing the heavens. These vast monuments, carved with astonishing precision, were not built by kings or priests, but by craftsmen, stonemasons who labored in near anonymity, yet whose skill shaped the skyline of Christendom. It was among these men, the builders of cathedrals, that the earliest seeds of Freemasonry were sown. In the 12th and 13th centuries, when cathedrals like Chartres, Notre Dame, and Canterbury were rising, the stonemason was not merely a laborer. He was an artist, mathematician, and engineer rolled into one. To cut a stone that would hold the weight of an arch required not just muscle, but knowledge of geometry, proportion, and harmony. These were sciences that few outside their trade understood, and so the Masons guarded their knowledge fiercely. To protect their craft, they created guilds, closed fraternities bound together by codes of conduct, mutual protection, and, most importantly, secrets. Within these guilds, apprentices were initiated, passed through stages of learning, and tested before becoming full masters. But beyond teaching technical skills, the guilds relied on rituals of secrecy. Special words and handshakes distinguished trained Masons from imposters, ensuring that only the initiated could claim the privileges of the craft. If a stranger arrived at a building site, he would be asked to give the sign, to show by gesture or phrase that he belonged. Without it, he was an outsider, barred from the brotherhood. Already, the seeds of what would later blossom into Masonic ritual were present. Secrecy, symbols, oaths, and the sense of belonging to a world apart. But secrecy was not merely practical. It carried a kind of mystique, a sense that the Masons were guardians of something higher than stone. To the illiterate peasant gazing up at the stained glass windows of a cathedral, the Masons must have seemed like magicians. How else could ordinary men create monuments that soared hundreds of feet into the air, that seemed to defy gravity itself? To build a cathedral was to tame the laws of nature, and those who did so seemed almost to share in divine knowledge. Perhaps this is why, even then, whispers of the Masons as keepers of hidden wisdom began to spread. There's a striking irony in these origins. The Masons built the greatest temples of Christianity, yet their own practices existed outside the church's control. A Mason could move from one town to the next, crossing borders with little interference, recognized by his secret signs and welcomed by fellow craftsmen. In an age when most men never left their villages, the Mason was a traveler, a bearer of knowledge, a citizen of a wider world. This mobility gave them a freedom both envied and distrusted. Kings needed them to build their fortresses. Bishops needed them to raise their cathedrals, yet neither could ever fully own their secrets. Over time, the guilds became more than just associations of workers. They developed their own mythology, drawing inspiration from the Bible and from ancient stories. The construction of Solomon's Temple, the legendary house of God built in Jerusalem, became central to their symbolic identity. In their rituals, Masons imagined themselves as heirs to Hiram, the master builder of the temple, whose knowledge of divine geometry was said to come from God himself. Whether or not the guilds truly traced such a lineage mattered less than the power of the myth. To build with stone was to echo the work of sacred history. By the late Middle Ages, the physical demand for cathedral builders waned, but the lodges endured. The Renaissance brought new currents of thought, humanism, mysticism, and a rediscovery of classical knowledge, and some lodges began to welcome men who were not stonecutters at all. Wealthy patrons, scholars, and nobles joined the gatherings, attracted by the aura of secrecy and the promise of symbolic wisdom. The guild was transforming into something else, no longer a society of builders alone, but a brotherhood of seekers. This transformation from operative masonry, working with stone, to speculative masonry, working with ideas and symbols, would define the birth of Freemasonry as we know it. But the heart of this transformation lay in the rituals. Imagine the scene: a young apprentice, nervous and uncertain, standing before the masters of the lodge. He is questioned, tested, and finally entrusted with the secret signs of his rank. With these signs, he can travel to distant cities and be welcomed as a brother. He can find work, food, and protection in foreign lands. To betray the secrets would mean exclusion, shame, and the loss of everything. The rituals bound men together not just in work, but in loyalty and trust. To be a Mason was to belong to a family that stretched across nations. In those rituals, we glimpsed the first sparks of the symbolic drama that would later fascinate the world. The tools of the craft, the compass, the square, the level, and the plumb line, became not only practical instruments but moral emblems. The square represented fairness, the compass restraint, the level equality, the plumb uprightness. In these metaphors, the Mason's trade became a guide for life itself. Stone was only the beginning. The true temple to be built was the character of the man. It is no wonder, then, that when outsiders peered into the lodges, they saw more than workers' guilds. They saw men with secrets, symbols, and allegories that reached beyond stone. Were the Masons simply craftsmen protecting their livelihood, or were they the keepers of an ancient current of wisdom passed down in code? The answer, perhaps, is both. In their secrecy, they preserved the dignity of their craft. In their symbols, they hinted at deeper truths. And in their gatherings, they forged a sense of belonging that would outlive the cathedrals themselves. The legacy of those builders lingers even now. Every stone arch, every soaring spire, every rose window is a testament not only to their skill but to their secrecy. The Masons left behind monuments of stone, but they also left behind something less tangible. The idea that hidden knowledge, protected by ritual and oath, can transform both man and society. That idea would prove irresistible to generations that followed. As the medieval world gave way to the modern, the lodges opened their doors not to the uninitiated public, but to a new kind of initiate, gentlemen, philosophers, and visionaries who sought meaning beyond the ordinary. They inherited the symbols, the rituals, and the secrecy of the builders, but they would use them to construct something not of stone, but of ideas. From cathedral builders to secret philosophers, the journey was underway. And so, we'll leave the ringing of hammers and chisels behind, and turn to the taverns and parlors of early modern Europe. It is here that the Masons' transformation takes root, the moment when a brotherhood of stonecutters becomes a society of seekers, and the whispers begin to take on new and far more dangerous meaning. The transition from Masons' guild to secret society did not happen in a single night. It unfolded slowly, quietly, like mortar setting between stones. By the early 17th century, Europe was changing. The medieval world of cathedrals and castles was giving way to a new age of science, philosophy, and political upheaval. The lodges, once meeting places for stonemasons on cathedral work sites, began to open their doors to men who had never touched a chisel. These newcomers were not builders of stone, but builders of ideas, scholars, nobles, merchants, and thinkers drawn by the aura of secrecy that surrounded the Masons. At first, their presence may have seemed strange. What business did a wealthy landowner or a curious philosopher have in a Mason's lodge? Yet the rituals, the oaths, and the symbols held a kind of universal appeal. They promised access to something ancient and exclusive, a brotherhood that crossed social boundaries. In a time when society was rigidly divided by class and birth, the lodge offered something different, a space where a craftsman and a nobleman could sit side by side as brothers. That alone was revolutionary. The earliest records of these new speculative lodges come from Scotland in the late 1500s. Manuscripts describe meetings where operative Masons were joined by accepted members, outsiders welcomed into the fraternity. These men did not come to learn stonecraft. Instead, they sought moral instruction through allegory, fellowship through secrecy, and the thrill of belonging to something hidden from the wider world. By the early 1600s, such lodges were spreading through Britain, adapting the old traditions into something entirely new. Picture the scene in one of these early lodges, a tavern room lit by firelight, its shutters closed against the outside world. Around the table sit men of varied backgrounds, their voices hushed as they recite oaths and exchange the signs of their brotherhood. On the table lie tools of the Mason's trade, but here they are not used to build cathedrals. They are props in a symbolic drama, metaphors for moral truths. The square becomes a reminder to live with fairness. The compass becomes a lesson in self-control. The ritual is part theater, part spiritual exercise, and holy secret. It was this secrecy that made the lodges irresistible to outsiders. To join was to step into a hidden world, to become part of a lineage that claimed to stretch back to the builders of Solomon's temple and the guardians of ancient mysteries. Whether or not such claims were true mattered less than the sense of belonging they created. For a merchant seeking prestige, for a philosopher seeking hidden wisdom, or for a noble seeking a circle of influence, the lodge offered what the world outside could not. The first speculative lodges also became meeting places for new ideas. Europe at the time was a powder keg of religion and politics. The Protestant Reformation had torn apart the unity of Christendom, while new scientific discoveries were challenging centuries of dogma. To speak freely in public could be dangerous, even fatal. But within the closed walls of the lodge, men could debate philosophy, experiment with symbolism, and imagine new forms of society. In this sense, the lodge became more than just a fraternity. It was a laboratory for ideas that would shape the modern world. As these lodges grew in number, so too did the rituals. What had once been simple signs of trade identity evolved into elaborate ceremonies of initiation. Candidates were blindfolded, led into the chamber, and tested with oaths of secrecy. The experience was dramatic, almost theatrical, designed to impress upon the initiate that he was entering a world apart. For men accustomed to the formality of church or court, the strange symbols and gestures of the lodge must have felt both unsettling and intoxicating. By the 17th century, whispers of these lodges were spreading beyond Britain. Travelers carried tales of secret meetings, of strange rituals in candlelit rooms, of a brotherhood that spanned nations. In an age obsessed with conspiracies, where witches were hunted and heresies feared, such stories only fed suspicion. Were these lodges harmless gatherings of curious men, or were they plotting something more dangerous? The truth, hidden behind oaths and closed doors, remained elusive. The shift from operative to speculative masonry was not only a transformation of membership, but a transformation of purpose. No longer concerned with the building of cathedrals, the lodges reimagined themselves as builders of the inner temple, the moral and spiritual development of man. The tools of the trade became emblems of virtue. The lodge itself became a temple of wisdom, hidden in plain sight in the back rooms of taverns and the halls of guilds. It is easy to overlook the significance of this change, but in it lies the foundation of the Masonic mystery. A guild of craftsmen had reinvented itself as a society of seekers. Their rituals were no longer about proving one's skill with stone, but about proving one's worth as a brother. Their secrets were no longer about geometry alone, but about truth said to touch the very soul of man. The lodges had become something larger than themselves, something destined to spread far beyond the quarries and scaffolds of medieval Europe. And yet, even as they changed, they clung to the imagery of their origins. The square, the compass, the Temple of Solomon, these remained central, anchoring the new fraternity in the legacy of the old. It was this fusion of past and present, of stone and spirit, that gave Freemasonry its unique character. A tradition rooted in craft but aspiring to philosophy, born in the dust of cathedrals yet destined to sit in the parlors of kings. The first lodges were modest, often little more than gatherings of a handful of men. But from these quiet beginnings would emerge one of the most widespread and controversial societies the world has ever known. Their oaths would echo across continents. Their symbols would appear on monuments, documents, and even currency. Their secrecy would ignite both awe and fear in equal measure. The lodges had been born, and as they spread, they would no longer remain unnoticed. They would attract kings and revolutionaries, artists and assassins, priests and heretics. They would become a mirror in which the world saw both its hopes and its nightmares. The whispers had found a home, and soon, the whispers would become a roar. The rise of speculative Freemasonry was accompanied by an air of secrecy so thick that even its earliest members could scarcely separate truth from legend. By the mid-17th century, the lodges had already established themselves as something unusual in Europe, communities bound not by blood, land, or nation, but by hidden signs, whispered words, and ritual bonds. Outsiders saw only fragments of this world, flickers of candlelight through shuttered windows, symbols etched into meeting halls, and rumors that traveled from tavern to tavern. It was enough to ignite suspicion, curiosity, and fear in equal measure. To understand why secrecy was so essential, one must remember the world in which these lodges operated. Europe was torn by wars of religion. The Protestant Reformation had shattered Catholic authority, unleashing decades of bloodshed. Civil wars erupted in England, rebellions flared in Scotland and Ireland, and the shadow of the Inquisition still loomed across much of the continent. In such an atmosphere, any private gathering, especially one that crossed class and religious boundaries, was bound to draw suspicion. For the members themselves, secrecy served multiple purposes. It offered protection against accusations of heresy or treason, both of which could mean imprisonment or death. It created a sense of unity, of shared danger that bound men together more tightly than friendship alone ever could. And beyond the practical, secrecy gave the lodge an aura of mystery, an irresistible allure that drew new members into its circle. The very act of hiding made the fraternity seem more powerful than it truly was. Inside these shadowed lodges, the rituals grew increasingly elaborate. Initiates swore solemn oaths upon sacred texts, binding themselves to eternal silence. Blindfolded, they were led through symbolic trials designed to teach lessons about morality, trust, and loyalty. The candidate might feel the prick of a sword against his chest, hear the clash of tools, or be startled by sudden commands shouted in the dark. When at last the blindfold was removed, the initiate would see the lodge illuminated by candlelight, the brethren arrayed around him, their faces solemn and knowing. In that moment, he was no longer an outsider. He was part of the brotherhood. The secrecy extended far beyond the rituals themselves. Signs, grips, and words were devised so that a Mason could recognize another in the street or even in a foreign land, without a single outsider realizing what had passed between them. Some were simple, a handshake with a hidden pressure, a gesture made with the hand. Others were more complex, words or phrases that changed depending on the level of initiation. To the uninitiated, it looked like nothing. To the brother, it was everything, proof of belonging, protection in dangerous times, and the key to doors otherwise closed. What was happening in these lodges was remarkable. In a society obsessed with hierarchy, where the gulf between a nobleman and a commoner was vast and unquestioned, the lodge created a rare space of equality. Within its walls, titles and wealth mattered less than loyalty to the brotherhood. A merchant could sit beside a duke as an equal, bound by the same oaths. It was this spirit of fraternity that gave Freemasonry its enduring power. Yet to the outside world, this equality was threatening. Churches worried that the lodges represented a rival religion, one based not on divine revelation but on secret knowledge. Governments feared that men meeting in secrecy, bound by oaths to each other above all else, might become a breeding ground for sedition. And ordinary people, hearing whispers of symbols and rituals, filled the gaps with imagination. Some believed the Masons were heirs to the Knights Templar, still plotting vengeance against the church that destroyed them. Others claimed they were guardians of occult secrets passed down from Egypt, or even conspirators bent on overthrowing kings. Such stories only deepened the lodge's allure. To join was to step into a world of myth as much as reality, to carry the weight of 1,000 legends on one's shoulders. For some, it was intoxicating. For others, it was terrifying. The truth, of course, lay somewhere between. The early speculative lodges were not yet the global power they would one day become. There were small gatherings, fragile and experimental. But because they operated in shadows, their reputation outstripped their reality. A handful of men meeting by candlelight could be imagined as a vast network, a secret parliament steering the destiny of nations. In the Europe of suspicion and fear, perception mattered as much as fact, and perception would soon change everything. As lodges grew, so too did the idea that they were part of something larger, a network of brothers across borders, united by secrecy. In an age where travel was perilous and nations often at war, this alone was extraordinary. A Mason could journey hundreds of miles and, by secret sign or whispered word, find welcome in a lodge of strangers. Brotherhood had become portable, transcending borders. But such a network was bound to draw the eyes of power. Kings, bishops, and inquisitors began to take notice. If this brotherhood in the shadows was merely harmless ritual, why did it need so many oaths, so much secrecy? And if it was more than ritual, what were they planning behind those closed doors? These questions would haunt Freemasonry for centuries, feeding both its mystique and its controversies. By the end of the 17th century, The Masonic lodges had become a riddle wrapped in shadows. They were at once social clubs, schools of philosophy, and ritual theaters. They were inclusive and exclusive, open to new members yet closed to outsiders. They were everywhere and nowhere, visible only to those who knew the signs. To their members, they offered meaning, fraternity, and a glimpse of higher truths. To their enemies, they represented a dangerous secret, a society within society, loyal only to itself. The brotherhood had been born in the shadows, and in the shadows it would thrive. But shadows are never still. They move, they stretch, they grow. Soon, the lodges would step out from their hidden corners into the light of history. Their secrecy, once a shield, would draw both admiration and wrath. And the world, whether ready or not, would have to reckon with them. The brotherhood that had begun in dimly lit taverns and guild halls could not remain hidden forever. By the late 17th and early 18th centuries, the lodges had begun to multiply, stretching far beyond the British Isles. What started as small circles of initiates whispering oaths and exchanging cryptic signs soon swelled into a movement that would sweep across Europe. This spread was not an accident. It was born of a hunger, men longing for certainty in an uncertain age, for community in a world divided by faith and war, for mysteries that promised something greater than the mundane lives they endured. London became the first great crucible of speculative Freemasonry. It was there, in 1717, that four small lodges gathered in a modest tavern and united to form the first Grand Lodge of England. To outsiders, it may have seemed an unremarkable meeting, but in truth it was a revolution. For the first time, the scattered lodges were no longer isolated pockets of secrecy. They had begun to organize, to standardize rituals, and to present themselves as something legitimate. It was a bold declaration. Freemasonry was no longer confined to shadows. It was stepping onto the stage of history. From London, the idea radiated outward like ripples in a pond. The lodges spread to France, where they found fertile ground among intellectuals and nobles alike. In Parisian salons, Masonic gatherings were spoken of in hushed tones, places where men of rank and influence mingled with thinkers and dreamers, shielded by secrecy from the rigid hierarchies of court and church. For many, the lodge became a sanctuary where dangerous ideas could be whispered without fear. Liberty, equality, brotherhood, words that would, in time, shake empires. In Germany, Freemasonry struck a different chord. There, the lodges became entwined with the burgeoning world of mysticism and philosophy. Thinkers steeped in Hermeticism, alchemy, and Rosicrucian lore joined hands with pragmatic men of science. The rituals absorbed echoes of both reason and esotericism, turning German Freemasonry into something at once rational and arcane. It was in these lands that the first whispers of high-degree Masonry took shape, systems of initiation that promised deeper truths, higher secrets, and paths to hidden wisdom far beyond the reach of the ordinary brother. Italy, fractured and turbulent, so lodges flourish under the noses of suspicious rulers and inquisitorial eyes. In cities like Florence, Venice, and Rome itself, Masons met behind shuttered windows, drawing members from the ranks of artists, scholars, and exiled political figures. The lodges carried the flavor of rebellion. Each oath taken beneath candlelight seemed to carry a hidden promise of resistance, a quiet defiance against the heavy hand of authority. But it was in France that the Masonic lodges truly became a force of culture. By mid-century, Paris alone counted dozens of active lodges, many patronized by members of the aristocracy. Some of the greatest minds of the Enlightenment found themselves within their walls. Voltaire, who once mocked superstition, was initiated into the craft late in life, his presence lending intellectual weight to the brotherhood. The lodges were more than just secret societies. They were laboratories of thought. Within them, ideas flowed more freely than in the censored press or the tightly controlled universities. To outsiders, this expansion looked suspicious, even dangerous. The Catholic Church, alarmed by the rapid spread of the lodges, condemned Freemasonry in 1738. The papal bull declared the society heretical, its secrecy incompatible with Christian duty, its mingling of men across ranks and creeds a threat to divine order. But the band did little to halt the spread. If anything, it added fuel to the fire. To be condemned by Rome was, for many intellectuals and nobles, a badge of honor. Lodges sprang up in defiance, cloaked not only in secrecy but now in defiance of religious authority. Each nation shaped Freemasonry in its own image, and yet beneath the variations, the core remained the same: secrecy, ritual, brotherhood. The signs and words allowed members to pass unseen across borders. A Mason traveling from Edinburgh to Vienna, from Paris to Warsaw, could find welcome in a lodge far from home. In a Europe divided by language, culture, and faith, Freemasonry became a passport to belonging. The brotherhood was not tied to kings or nations. It belonged to itself. This universality was both its greatest strength and its greatest danger. In France, whispers began that the lodges were becoming hotbeds of revolution, where aristocrats rubbed shoulders with merchants and radicals, sowing seeds of equality that would one day erupt into fire. In the German states, the proliferation of high-degree rites led to rumors of occult secrets, claims that the Masons were guardians of alchemical wisdom, or even that they communed with hidden masters who guided the fate of Europe. In Britain, the Crown and Parliament eyed the lodges with a mixture of pride and fear. They had been born on English soil, but their growth abroad seemed beyond any king's control. The spread across Europe also brought with it an evolution of myth. Each lodge laid its own history onto the fraternity, weaving tales of ancient origins to justify its importance. Some claimed direct descent from the Temple of Solomon, others from the builders of the pyramids. In France, stories tied the craft to the chivalric orders, the long-lost Templars who had once wielded both sword and secret. These myths were not meant to be believed literally, but they gave the members a sense of purpose, a feeling of standing in a tradition older than kingdoms. And in a world still ruled by dynasties and dogma, such myths were intoxicating. By the mid-18th century, Freemasonry was no longer an obscure brotherhood whispered about in dark corners. It had become a continental phenomenon, a network stretching across borders, binding thousands of men with secrecy and ritual. Some joined for curiosity, others for ambition, still others for the promise of hidden truths. Whatever their reasons, they carried with them the symbols and oaths that marked them as part of something larger, something both celebrated and feared. But the wider the network grew, the more visible it became. Secrecy that once protected the lodges now made them the target of suspicion. Governments debated how to deal with this brotherhood within society. Churches railed against their hidden meetings. Pamphlets accused them of blasphemy, sorcery, or conspiracy. Yet the lodges only continued to spread. Each accusation only sharpened their mystique. Each condemnation drew new recruits eager to taste the forbidden. The spread across Europe was unstoppable, and in its wake, Freemasonry was transformed. No longer confined to a handful of lodges in Britain, it had become a continental brotherhood, a society that stretched from the courts of kings to the workshops of artisans, from the salons of Paris to the palaces of Vienna. The brotherhood that had begun as whispers in the shadows now cast a shadow of its own, long, deep, and impossible to ignore. And from Europe, the movement would not stop. Its gaze turned across the oceans, to the New World, where revolution brewed and destiny beckoned. The brotherhood, once secret and fragile, was about to shape the birth of nations. The great wave of Freemasonry that swept across Europe did not stop at the continent's shores. It followed ships across the Atlantic, carried in the memories and oaths of men seeking a new life in the vast, uncertain territories of the New World. From the crowded docks of London to the cobbled streets of Boston, from the plantations of Virginia to the bustling port of Philadelphia, Freemasonry arrived quietly at first, just another society among many, but it would soon weave itself into the very fabric of American identity. In the colonies, life was harsh, uncertain, and often divided. Men of different backgrounds, Puritans, Quakers, Anglicans, merchants, farmers, and soldiers, found themselves thrown together in an unfamiliar land. Yet the Masonic Lodge offered something rare, a place where differences of faith, rank, and fortune could be set aside, where men could meet as equals under the banner of brotherhood. 4 settlers struggling to carve a life from wilderness. This sense of unity was more than symbolic. It was survival. The first recorded lodge in the colonies was established in Boston in 1733 under the authority of the Grand Lodge of England. Soon others followed: New York, Philadelphia, Charleston. In these lodges, candles flickered against wooden beams, aprons were donned, and rituals once whispered in European cities found new life in colonial halls. But hey, the craft took on a new character. In the Old World, secrecy had been a shield against kings and churches. In the New World, secrecy became a sanctuary from chaos. The lodges were not just places of ritual. There were safe havens of order and civility in a land where both were in short supply. It was no accident that some of the most influential men in colonial society found themselves drawn into Masonry's embrace. Benjamin Franklin, printer, scientist, and restless seeker of knowledge, became not only a Mason but also a leader of the fraternity in Pennsylvania. For Franklin, the craft was more than fraternity. It was a vessel for Enlightenment ideals, a platform to spread reason, science, and civic virtue. His publications of Masonic constitutions and rituals helped cement Freemasonry's presence in America. George Washington, too, entered the brotherhood, initiated in a Virginia lodge in 1752. The image of Washington standing in his Masonic regalia, solemn and dignified, has become iconic. For him, Masonry was not about conspiracy or hidden power. It was about discipline, loyalty, and unity, the very values he would later call upon to lead a fledgling nation through revolution and war. But to suggest that Freemasonry was simply a gathering of gentlemen would be to understate its role. In colonial America, the lodge was a crucible of ideas. By candlelight, men debated philosophy, liberty, and governance, subjects too dangerous to air in public halls where the eyes of the crown lingered. The secrecy of the lodges provided cover for conversations that, in time, would ignite rebellion. This was the subtle power of Masonry in America. It created networks of trust. A Mason in Boston could write to a brother in Philadelphia, confident that his words would be met with loyalty. A merchant, a soldier, and a lawyer could gather as equals and speak of liberty, bound by an oath that placed brotherhood above suspicion. It was not that Freemasonry directed the revolution from the shadows. History resists such simplicity, but rather that the lodges provided fertile soil where revolutionary ideals could take root. The British, watching from afar, grew suspicious. Reports filtered back that colonial lodges were hotbeds of seditious talk. Was Freemasonry nurturing rebellion? Or had the craft simply become entangled in the wider unrest of the colonies? The truth was more complicated. The lodges contained loyalists as well as patriots, yet the bonds of secrecy meant that what was said in one brotherhood could not easily be betrayed to another. In this way, Freemasonry acted less as a conspiracy and more as a shield, protecting the flow of ideas in an age of censorship and control. It is no coincidence that so many of America's founding figures were Freemasons. Washington, Franklin, Paul Revere, John Hancock. The list reads like a roll call of revolutionary leadership. But Masonry did not make them rebels. Rather, it gave them a shared language of symbols, rituals, and ideals that made cooperation possible. The compass and square, the level and plumb line, became more than tools of stonecraft. They were metaphors for equality, justice, and the building of a new society. In time, the imagery of Masonry bled into the very symbols of America itself. The Great Seal of the United States, with its unfinished pyramid and all-seeing eye, carries echoes of Masonic symbolism, whether by deliberate design or by the influence of men steeped in the craft. The architecture of the new capital, Washington, D.C., too, bears the mark of Masonic planning, its cornerstone laid with ritual by the Brotherhood's hand. Yet not everyone welcomed this influence. Just as in Europe, suspicion trailed the lodges. Some whispered that the revolution itself had been orchestrated by Masons, that the oaths sworn in dim colonial halls had been the true spark of independence. Others claimed that Masonry was a rival faith, a pagan cult masquerading in Enlightenment dress. But these accusations only deepened the Brotherhood's mystique. For every critic, There were 10 men eager to peer behind the veil, to join the ranks of those who claimed access to hidden truths. By the close of the 18th century, Freemasonry had become firmly woven into the identity of the new nation. It was not just a fraternity, it was a symbol of America's experiment, a reminder that order and liberty could coexist, that men of different ranks and creeds could meet on the level. The lodges had spread across the Atlantic like seeds scattered on fertile ground, and in the New World, they blossomed into something larger than anyone could have imagined. The journey of the craft was far from over. As the brotherhood expanded across oceans and continents, it would continue to evolve, drawing praise and condemnation in equal measure. In America, its symbols would become part of national mythology. In Europe, its secrecy would draw ever more suspicion. And in the centuries to come, the lodges would stand accused of shaping revolutions, manipulating governments, and guarding secrets too powerful for ordinary men to know. The Atlantic had been crossed, but a greater storm was brewing. As Masonry spread into the heart of revolutions and empires, its reputation would darken. To some, the craft was the torchbearer of enlightenment. To others, it was a cabal pulling the strings of history. The truth lay somewhere in between, but the world would not stop searching for answers. To the outside world, the greatest fascination of Freemasonry has always been its rituals. Men emerged from behind closed doors wearing aprons and jewels, whispering passwords, and carrying themselves with a solemnity that seemed to suggest they had glimpsed something forbidden. What really happened in those secret chambers? What oaths were spoken? What mysteries unveiled that made generations of men swear lifelong loyalty to the craft? The truth is layered. For Masonic ritual is not a single event, but a progression, a journey through stages known as degrees. Each degree carried lessons wrapped in allegory, with drama and symbolism designed to impress the initiate's mind. The experience was meant to transform a man, not simply entertain him. To understand this, one must imagine the scene: a dimly lit lodge room, its walls hung with symbols of geometry and architecture, the air heavy with candle smoke. Brothers stand in silence, their faces half in shadow, waiting as a candidate is brought forth, trembling, uncertain, and blindfolded. The initiation begins with disorientation. The blindfold, or hoodwink, is placed over the candidate's eyes, symbolizing ignorance. A rope, known as a cable tow, is draped around his body, binding him in a way that suggests both control and obligation. The message is clear. He is entering a new life, but he must first be humbled. In this vulnerable state, the candidate is led through symbolic trials, steps that mimic birth, death, and rebirth. He stumbles in the dark, hears strange words spoken in measured tones, and feels the point of a sword pressed against his chest as a reminder of the seriousness of his oaths. When he kneels to take his vows, the room falls silent. He swears upon a sacred text, often the Bible, though in later centuries other holy books would also be used, to keep the secrets of the brotherhood inviolate. To break these oaths, he is told, would mean punishment, sometimes described in vivid, even gruesome terms: to have his throat cut, his tongue torn out, his body buried where the tide ebbs and flows. The penalties were never meant to be literal, but the imagery left no doubt as to the gravity of betrayal. At last, the blindfold is removed, and the initiate beholds the lodge in full light. Around him stand his brothers, faces solemn, hands ready to welcome him. He is shown the symbols of the craft: the square, the compass, the level, and the plumb. Each tool is explained not as an object of stonework, but as a moral lesson. The square teaches virtue, the compass self-control, the level equality, the plumb integrity. In this way, Freemasonry presents itself as a school of moral architecture, building not cathedrals of stone but temples within the human heart. This is only the first degree, known as entered apprentice. From there, the Mason ascends through the fellow craft degree, where he learns more of the liberal arts and sciences, particularly geometry, which was revered as the key to understanding both nature and God. Finally comes the Master Mason degree, the heart of the craft. The initiate participates in a dramatic allegory, the story of Hiram Abiff, the legendary architect of Solomon's Temple. According to the ritual, Hiram is slain by 3 ruffians who seek the master's word, a secret of divine knowledge. Refusing to betray his oath, Hiram dies, only to be symbolically raised again through the grip of a brother. For the initiate, acting out this drama is a profound moment. It is a symbolic death and resurrection, teaching fidelity, sacrifice, and the promise of immortality. It is this story, more than any other, that binds Masons across centuries. To outsiders, it seemed cryptic, even sinister. To those who lived it, it was a transformative rite, a reminder that life itself is fleeting, but virtue endures. Beyond the 3 foundational degrees, new rituals sprouted as Masonry spread. In France and Germany, elaborate systems of higher degrees emerged, each promising deeper secrets. Some spoke of the lost word of God, others of hidden Templar knowledge, still others of alchemical enlightenment. The Scottish Rite, with its 33 degrees, eventually formalized many of these. Each degree laid new symbols upon the old, weaving a complex tapestry of myth, morality, and mystery. But secrecy was the lifeblood of these rituals. A Mason could not simply tell his wife, his son, or his neighbor what had happened inside the lodge. The signs, grips, and words were his alone to share with brothers. The secrecy gave the rituals power. Without it, they might have been seen as quaint theatrics. Cloaked in silence, they became charged with meaning, whispered of in taverns, condemned from pulpits, and sought after by the curious. The mystery of Masonic initiation fascinated and terrified outsiders in equal measure. Pamphlets circulated describing the oaths and penalties, often exaggerating them into lurid tales of blood and sacrifice. Clergymen thundered from pulpits that the Masons were worshippers of false gods, their rituals mockeries of Christian sacraments. Governments feared that such oaths made men loyal to the lodge above the state. And yet, the secrecy was also a law. For every critic, there was someone drawn to the promise of hidden knowledge, eager to pass through the same trials and glimpse what lay beyond the hoodwink. It is worth remembering that ritual is not unique to Freemasonry. Every religion, every culture, every army and monarchy uses ceremony to create meaning and bind members together. What made Masonry different was its universality. A farmer in Virginia could undergo the same initiation as a nobleman in Paris or philosopher in Berlin. The same words would be spoken, the same symbols revealed. Across oceans and languages, the ritual was a bridge. But rituals also evolve, and in their evolution, they reveal deeper currents. In America, the emphasis shifted toward liberty and civic virtue. In France, lodges adopted rituals colored by chivalric romance and revolutionary fervor. In Germany, they took on mystical and esoteric tones. The core remained, the journey from darkness to light, ignorance to knowledge, death to rebirth, but each land added its own layers of meaning. To the brothers themselves, the rituals were not superstition but instruction. They taught humility, loyalty, charity, and fraternity. Yet they also hinted, sometimes subtly, sometimes boldly, at something more. The idea that hidden wisdom existed, that the world itself was a temple filled with secrets, and that through discipline and brotherhood, a man might draw closer to truth. It was this suggestion of hidden knowledge that both fascinated and alarmed the wider world. Were the Masons merely teaching morality through metaphor? Or did they guard something greater, an ancient secret passed down from builders of cathedrals, Templar knights, or even the priests of Egypt? The rituals themselves never answered the question directly. They only suggested, pointed, hinted, and in the silence of those hints, imagination did the rest. As the 18th century wore on, these rituals became both the foundation and the fault line of Masonry's reputation. To initiates, they were sacred dramas of light and truth. To outsiders, they were masks hiding darker intentions. And as revolutions erupted and empires trembled, the suspicion that Masonic rituals concealed more than morality would fuel conspiracy theories that echo even today. The veil had been lifted, if only slightly, revealing just enough to fascinate and disturb. But the deeper question lingered, haunting both brother and outsider alike. Were these rituals merely symbolic plays or keys to powers and truths that could reshape the world? If ritual was the heartbeat of Freemasonry, then symbols were its language. To the uninitiated, a lodge might appear decorated with curious tools of the builder's trade: compasses, squares, plumbs, levels, and trowels. Yet to the brothers, these were not mere instruments of stonecutters. Each carried moral, philosophical, and sometimes mystical significance. In the Masonic worldview, the world itself was a great edifice, and men were the builders. By learning the language of symbols, a Mason was meant to learn how to shape his own character as carefully as a craftsman shapes stone. Consider the square and compass, the most recognizable of all Masonic emblems. The square represents morality, the standard by which actions must be judged. The compass symbolizes restraint, the ability to draw a circle around one's passions and keep them within bounds. Together, they balance freedom with discipline, suggesting that true wisdom lies not in indulgence but in harmony. Often, the letter G was placed at their center. To some, it stood for God, the great architect of the universe. To others, it meant geometry, the divine science through which the Creator's design could be discerned. The level and the plumb line spoke in quieter tones. The level reminded Masons that all men are equal in the face of mortality. Rank, wealth, and power dissolve when weighed against the inevitability of death. The plumb line, forever upright, symbolized integrity, standing true, no matter the pressures of the world. A Mason who lived squarely and uprightly was building a moral temple more enduring than any structure of stone. Even the act of building itself became allegory. The rough ashlar, a block of stone fresh from the quarry, stood for the unrefined human soul. Through labor, discipline, and the application of Masonic virtues, it could be transformed into the perfect ashlar, fit for the construction of the eternal temple. Every man, then, was a stone in progress, imperfect but capable of refinement. This language extended beyond the lodge into architecture. Cathedrals, churches, and even civic buildings across Europe and later America were adorned with Masonic motifs. Pillars, arches, suns, moons, and stars were not simply decorative. They carried layered meanings. The two great pillars, often named Jachin and Boaz after those at Solomon's Temple, flanked lodge entrances and appeared on tracing boards, reminding members of strength and stability. The blazing star, often placed within the compass, symbolized divine providence, enlightenment, or the guiding light of truth. Tracing boards, painted or carved panels used in lodge instruction, were dense with these emblems. A single board might depict a ladder reaching to heaven, symbolizing the virtues by which a Mason ascends. A mosaic pavement of black and white tiles represented the duality of existence: light and darkness, good and evil, joy and sorrow. To meditate on these designs was to glimpse a vision of the universe as a grand symbolic tapestry, where every line, angle, and color carried meaning. But the language of symbols did not belong to Masonry alone. Many of its emblems were borrowed from older traditions. The square and compass were known to medieval builders long before speculative Masonry arose. The blazing star could recall Christian imagery of Bethlehem or pagan depictions of divine light. The all-seeing eye, later adopted by Masons, was an ancient symbol of divine watchfulness, appearing in Egyptian, Christian, and Renaissance art alike. What Masonry did was weave these disparate strands into a coherent symbolic vocabulary, one that transcended religion, class, and nation. This adaptability gave the craft enormous power. In Catholic France, the symbols could be read in light of Christian mysticism. In Enlightenment England, they could be framed as emblems of reason and natural philosophy. In the new United States, they resonated with civic virtue, appearing on public buildings, gravestones, and even the Great Seal of a nation. The eye within a triangle, shining above an unfinished pyramid, was not originally a purely Masonic creation, but its resonance with the fraternity's imagery cemented its association in popular imagination. The language of Masonry also spoke in secrecy. Certain symbols were understood only by initiates, revealed gradually as a Mason advanced through degrees. signs, and handshakes, known as grips, were themselves symbolic, physical expressions of the brotherhood's bonds. Even the simple act of drawing a circle in the sand or carving a compass into stone might signal to another Mason that he was among brethren, even if surrounded by strangers. Outsiders, of course, saw only fragments of this symbolic web. A carved square and compass on a gravestone hinted at hidden meanings. A blazing star on a large door suggested mysteries within. Such fragments became fertile ground for speculation. Was the all-seeing eye proof that Masons worshipped an unknown god? Did the twin pillars conceal the wisdom of Solomon? Was the checkerboard floor a map of cosmic duality? These questions, unanswered by the lodges themselves, gave the symbols a life beyond their original intent. They were copied into conspiracy pamphlets, reinterpreted by occultists, and feared by religious critics. Yet within the craft, the symbols remained what they had always been, a language of moral teaching, a reminder that the universe was both a construction site and a temple, and that every man was both builder and stone. To walk through a city with Masonic eyes was to see differently. A cathedral spire became a finger pointing heavenward, a column a testament to stability, a square a lesson in justice. The world was not mute but inscribed, its stones whispering lessons to those who knew the code. This was perhaps Masonry's greatest gift to its members, not secret power, but a secret way of seeing, one that transformed the ordinary into the symbolic, the mundane into the sacred. And yet, because the symbols were never fully explained, they also hinted at more. To some, they were moral guides. To others, they suggested deeper, hidden truths about God, the cosmos, and humanity's place within it. It was this openness, this refusal to define everything, that allowed Masonic symbolism to inspire suspicion and fascination in equal measure. For in symbols, as in silence, there is room for mystery. Revolutions are rarely born overnight. They are cultivated in whispers, in taverns thick with smoke, in pamphlets printed on cheap paper, and in secret societies where men feel emboldened to speak thoughts too dangerous for the open air. In the 18th century, as monarchies trembled and new ideals of liberty and equality spread across Europe and the Americas, Freemasonry found itself caught at the center of history's turning wheel. The fraternities' lodges, once places of private moral instruction, became crucibles where the dreams of revolutionaries were tested, refined, and whispered into action. In the American colonies, the presence of Freemasons among the Founding Fathers was no coincidence. George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, John Hancock, Paul Revere, names etched into the very mythology of the Republic, were all members of the craft. The lodge gave them not only a fraternity but also a language, one infused with ideals that resonated deeply with the Enlightenment, liberty of conscience, equality of men, and the construction of a better world. The symbolism of the rough ashlar refined into the perfect ashlar echoed in the idea of a new nation forged from raw colonial beginnings into a more perfect union. Benjamin Franklin, perhaps the most cosmopolitan of the founders, carried Masonry across the Atlantic. In Paris, where he served as ambassador, Franklin became a prominent figure in French lodges. These were not mere clubs but lively forums where nobles, intellectuals, and commoners mingled in a spirit of equality rare for the rigidly stratified Ancien regime. In such spaces, ideas of rights, citizenship, and reform could be discussed with a candor impossible in courtly salons. The lodge, in its quiet way, blurred the boundaries of class, planting seeds of revolution. Meanwhile, George Washington's association with Masonry lent the fraternity a symbolic weight in the new republic. At his inauguration in 1789, he is said to have laid his hand upon a Masonic Bible. Later, he attended cornerstone-laying ceremonies where Masonic ritual was on full display, presenting the young nation as a building under divine guidance. The imagery of Masonry, tools, pillars, and the eye of providence seeped into the iconography of the United States itself. The unfinished pyramid and radiant eye on the Great Seal, though not exclusively Masonic, carried an unmistakable resonance with the fraternity's visual vocabulary. To the public, the connection seemed undeniable. America itself looked like a Masonic project, but across the Atlantic, Masonry's role in revolution was more volatile and more dangerous. In France, lodges had flourished in the decades before 1789. Unlike the British model, which often leaned toward moderation and loyalty to the crown, French Masonry took on a more radical hue. Philosophers, reformers, and discontented aristocrats found common ground within lodge walls. They spoke of liberty, equality, and fraternity, words that would soon thunder from the streets of Paris. The revolution in France became entangled with Masonic ideals in ways that were both real and exaggerated. On one hand, many leaders of the early revolution, Lafayette, Mirabeau, and others, were indeed Freemasons. Their speeches echoed the fraternity's emphasis on brotherhood and universal rights. On the other hand, the chaos of the revolution soon transcended the control of any group. The guillotine did not spare Masons, and lodges were themselves shuttered in the terror. Yet, in the imagination of both supporters and detractors, Masonry remained linked to the upheaval. To conservatives and monarchists, the craft became a convenient scapegoat, an invisible hand accused of orchestrating the destruction of throne and altar. This association between Masonry and revolution did not stop with France. Throughout the 19th century, wherever monarchies cracked and republics rose, whispers of Masonic involvement followed. In Italy, Giuseppe Garibaldi, the fiery general who helped unite the country, was a Freemason and saw in the fraternity a network of allies across borders. In Latin America, leaders like Simon Bolivar and José de San Martín, liberators of entire nations, were either members or closely connected to Masonic circles. The lodges provided not only ideological nourishment, but also networks of trust and communication, essential tools in times when open plotting against empires could mean death. Still, Masonry was not a revolutionary movement in itself. The fraternity's official principles emphasized morality, fraternity, and improvement of the self rather than the overthrow of governments. Its lodges contained men loyal to kings as well as men dreaming of republics. The diversity of membership made it less a political engine than a cultural mirror, reflecting the aspirations of its age. What gave the impression of conspiracy was the simple fact that Masons, bound by trust and secrecy, could communicate across borders and classes in ways few other organizations could. A symbol drawn on a scrap of paper, a whispered password, a grip exchanged in a darkened alley. These were enough to connect men from Philadelphia to Paris, from London to Lima. This ability to transcend boundaries alarmed rulers. Pope Clement XII had already condemned Masonry in 1738, warning of its secrecy and religious ambiguity. After the French Revolution, such suspicions only deepened. Monarchs and clerics alike painted the fraternity as a dangerous cabal plotting global upheaval. Whether or not this was true mattered less than the perception. To enemies of revolution, the Masons became a symbol of shadowy power, an invisible brotherhood pulling strings behind the curtain of history. Yet for the brothers themselves, the Revolutionary era revealed the dual edge of their ideals. On one side, Masonry's language of equality and liberty inspired noble dreams. On the other, the storms those dreams unleashed often spun beyond control, leaving blood in the streets and suspicion upon the craft. The fraternity that had once promised quiet moral instruction now bore the burden of being seen as a revolutionary force, whether it claimed the title or not. The intertwining of Masonry and revolution left a legacy that still lingers. In America, Masonic symbolism became woven into national identity, giving the fraternity a place of honor in public life. In Europe, it became a target of conspiracy theories and accusations of subversion, a reputation it carries even today. The same symbols that inspired builders of nations were, in other eyes, marks of treachery. As the dust of revolutions settled, Masonry would face new challenges. Its reputation, both admired and feared, would make it a lightning rod for suspicion in the centuries to come. The fraternity that once thrived on secrecy and symbolism now found itself under the relentless gaze of the public, its rituals dissected, its oaths questioned, and its very existence woven into the fabric of conspiracy law. For if revolutions showed the power of Masonry's networks and ideals, they also raised a dangerous question. If the craft could shape nations, what else might it be capable of shaping in the shadows? The revolutions of the 18th century had thrust Freemasonry into the spotlight. Its lodges, once private chambers for moral allegory, were now suspected of harboring plots to upend kingdoms and alter. Where some saw enlightened men building a better world, others saw conspirators cloaked in ritual and secrecy. From pulpits, thrones, and printing presses, a new narrative emerged, one in which Masonry was not a fraternity of builders but a shadowy cabal, a hidden hand guiding history's upheavals for its own ends. The Catholic Church had long been uneasy with Freemasonry. In 1738, Pope Clement XII issued the first papal bull condemning the craft, warning that its secrecy and religious ambiguity endangered the faith of Christians. At the time, this decree seemed premature to some. Why fear a society devoted to virtue and brotherhood? But after the French Revolution, the condemnation gained sharper teeth. Clergy looked upon the chaos in Paris, the dethroning of kings, and the blood on the guillotine's blade, and they saw proof of what they had warned. Masonry was the serpent in the garden, whispering dangerous dreams into the ears of men. Accusations began to circulate with fervor. Pamphlets and books claimed that the fraternity worshipped strange gods, or perhaps no god at all. Some alleged that Masons performed blasphemous rituals, mocking Christian sacraments under the guise of allegory. Others claimed the craft had no moral purpose at all, that its secrecy masked a lust for power, wealth, and influence. For those already unsettled by revolution and the crumbling of old orders, Masonry became a convenient villain, a face for the fear that the world itself was shifting beyond recognition. In Protestant lands, suspicion took on a different hue. Too, clerics railed against the fraternity, but political leaders also grew wary. Monarchs, accustomed to controlling the loyalties of their subjects, did not look kindly upon a society that bound men with secret oaths. If a Mason swore loyalty to his brothers above his king, what security could a throne claim? Governments across Europe, from Austria to the Papal States, began banning lodges, raiding their halls, and scattering their archives. The more Masonry was persecuted, the more mysterious it seemed. Men whispered about meetings underground, rituals performed at midnight, and ceremonies guarded by passwords and handshakes. To outsiders, secrecy itself was proof of guilt. After all, why would men hide if they had nothing to conceal? The lodge doors, once symbols of fraternity, now looked like gates to conspiracy. This suspicion crossed the Atlantic as well. In the young United States, where many leaders were openly Masons, public opinion was divided. Some viewed Masonry as a noble tradition woven into the nation's fabric. Others feared it as a dangerous aristocracy, a hidden elite undermining democracy. The tension exploded in 1826 with the disappearance of William Morgan, a man who had threatened to publish the secrets of the craft. Morgan vanished, presumed murdered by enraged Masons seeking to preserve their vows. Though the truth remains uncertain, the case ignited outrage. Anti-Masonic movements erupted, demanding the suppression of lodges. For the first time in American history, a political party was formed around opposition to Freemasonry, the Anti-Masonic Party. It gained traction, especially in rural and religious communities, painting the craft as a corrupting force within the Republic. To them, Masonry was not a harmless society of builders but an aristocratic cancer eating at the heart of liberty. Politicians swore public oaths renouncing the fraternity, while newspapers printed lurid accounts of supposed Masonic plots. The storm eventually passed, but it left a scar. Masonry would forever be shadowed by suspicion in the public imagination. Part of the problem was that Masonry's symbols and rituals invited interpretation. What did the all-seeing eye truly represent? Was it divine providence, or surveillance of men? Were the twin pillars of Jachin and Boaz simple architectural references, or gateways to esoteric power? Every symbol became a canvas for fae, and because Masons refused to explain fully, bound by their oaths, the public was free to imagine the worst. Suspicion also bred fascination. Writers, mystics, and conspiracy theorists began weaving elaborate tales of Masonic involvement in everything from the assassination of kings to the manipulation of markets. Lodges were said to harbor alchemists, magicians, and even devil worshippers. What had begun as a fraternity of moral allegory was now painted as a secret order rivaling the church, the state, and perhaps even God himself. The irony was that, within the lodges, much of life remained ordinary. Men debated philosophy, shared meals, and listened to lectures on virtue. Yet the perception outside was far more powerful than the reality within. To be accused of Masonry became, in some places, as dangerous as being accused of heresy. Suspicion clung to the craft like a second skin, shaping how it would be seen for centuries to come. This shadow of suspicion had consequences. It forced Masons into greater secrecy, confirming for critics that they had something to hide. It attracted men intrigued by mystery, swelling the fraternity with seekers of hidden wisdom, not all of whom understood or cared for its moral core. And it cemented Masonry's place in the cultural imagination not just as a brotherhood, but as a symbol of hidden power, a role it has never quite escaped. As the 19th century unfolded, the accusations only grew louder. Masonry was no longer just a fraternity. It was cast as the mastermind behind revolutions, the corrupter of faith, and the architect of a new, secret world order. The truth was more complicated, as always, but the suspicion was enough to give birth to a mythology that still thrives today. For if Masonry could not be understood, it could be imagined. And imagination is often more dangerous than fact. For most men, the path through Masonry begins with the three foundational stages: entered apprentice, fellow craft, and master mason. These degrees alone carry weighty rituals, solemn oaths, and symbols rich with meaning. Yet for centuries, whispers have suggested that beyond these familiar steps lies something more: higher degrees, layers of initiation where the true secrets of the craft are kept. To outsiders, these whispered levels became proof of hidden power. To Masons themselves, the higher degrees were a labyrinth, part moral theater, part history lesson, and perhaps, for some, a passage to mysteries only half revealed. The so-called Scottish Rite is one of the most famous systems of higher degrees. Emerging in France during the 18th century and later refined in America, it offers a staggering 33 steps of initiation. Each degree is a world of its own, filled with elaborate costumes, dramatic reenactments, and allegories pulled from scripture, history, and myth. The 18th degree, known as the Knight Rose Croix, draws on Christian imagery of resurrection and spiritual renewal. The 30th degree, Knight Kardosh, is a fiery ritual of justice, sometimes accused of anti-monarchical overtones. And at the pinnacle stands the 33rd degree, an honorary recognition given to a select few, often shrouded in rumor as the summit of Masonic power. Then there is the York Rite, with its own system of advancement. Here, the journey takes Masons through chapters of Royal Arch Masonry, councils of Cryptic Masonry, and commanderies of Knights Templar. Each order layers new rituals and stories upon the foundation of the craft. The Royal Arch degree, for example, is often described as the completion of the Master Mason journey, revealing hidden words and secrets said to have been lost with the death of Hiram Abiff. For believers in deeper esoteric meaning, this discovery is no mere theatrical device but a symbolic unveiling of divine truth. Yet one must ask, are these higher degrees truly keepers of ancient secrets, or are they elaborate pageants designed to inspire and instruct? On the surface, they are carefully crafted moral plays. Masons dress as kings, prophets, or knights, enacting dramas that weave together fragments of biblical narrative, medieval legend, and Enlightenment philosophy. To the uninitiated, these ceremonies might appear strange, even absurd. But to participants, the layers of allegory carry lessons meant to shape the moral compass, to teach loyalty, courage, justice, and faith. Still, the existence of these degrees feeds the imagination of those who suspect hidden agendas. If the first three degrees are already veiled in secrecy, what then must be hidden in the 33rd? Surely, critics argue, these must be the true chambers where power is conferred, where dark pacts are made, where the real Masons meet in the shadows. Some conspiracy theorists claim that only in the upper degrees are initiates told the truth, that Masonry worships Lucifer, that it seeks global dominion, or that it hides ancient pagan mysteries disguised in Christian robes. These accusations have been repeated for centuries, often with little evidence but much conviction. There is, however, a different way to understand the higher degrees. They are not levels of power but of story. Each ritual is a performance designed to immerse the initiate in an allegory, much like a medieval mystery play or classical tragedy. The audience is not meant to believe literally in the events on stage but to wrestle with the meaning behind them. In the Knight Templar degree, for instance, one confronts questions of loyalty and sacrifice. In the Royal Arch, one grapples with loss and restoration. These are not conspiracies, but morality tales dramatized in sacred costume. And yet, the very theatricality of these rituals can stir something profound. The dim lighting, the solemn music, the clash of swords, the sudden unveiling of hidden symbols, all combine to create a sense of awe, a feeling that one has stepped outside of ordinary time. For some, this becomes a spiritual experience, akin to a religious initiation. For others, it is a stirring of imagination, a chance to glimpse oneself as part of a cosmic story. Whether one interprets this as genuine mystical revelation or carefully crafted drama depends largely on the eye of the beholder. The higher degrees also reflect the hunger of men for more. The first three stages may provide moral foundation, but human curiosity drives us toward the next chamber, the next secret, the next revelation. The expansion of rites in the 18th and 19th centuries can be seen as Masonry's response to this hunger, offering more lessons, more allegories, more mysteries for those unwilling to stop at the Master Mason's door. In this way, the higher degrees became both a spiritual ascent and a theatrical industry, drawing in those eager for secrets that might not truly exist. Still, the ambiguity of these degrees is precisely what gives them power. If they are only theater, they are nonetheless theater with a purpose, designed to shape the mind and stir the soul. If they hold secrets, those secrets are hidden in plain sight, veiled not by silence but by layers of symbolism waiting to be interpreted. To some, the Night Kardosh is a pageant of justice. To others, it is a veiled attack on monarchy. To one man, the 33rd degree is an honor of service. To another, it is the final step into a hidden empire. Thus, the higher degrees occupy a strange twilight between revelation and performance. They may not contain the world-shaking secrets critics imagine, but they succeed in keeping the imagination alive. And perhaps that is their true secret. Not power over nations, but power over minds, the ability to make men feel they are part of something vast, ancient, and eternal. And so the question remains, are the higher degrees the key to hidden wisdom, or simply mirrors reflecting the hopes and fears of those who pass through them? Masonry never answers. It only points upward, hinting that the next chamber may hold the truth. When one peers into the labyrinth of Masonic symbolism, it is difficult not to stumble across echoes of older, stranger traditions. The square and compass may appear as tools of geometry, but they also recall the instruments of alchemists mapping the transmutation of matter. The blazing star shines in large rooms, resembling the hermetic star of illumination. Even the Masonic fascination with Solomon's Temple carries hints of the mystical, resonating with Kabbalistic visions of the universe as a divine structure. For centuries, this overlap has fueled suspicions that Masonry is more than a fraternity. It is a hidden doorway into the occult arts. The roots of this connection reach back to Renaissance Europe, a time when the boundaries between science, religion, and magic were far more porous than we might imagine today. Scholars such as Marsilio Ficino and Giovanni Pico della Mirandola translated ancient texts of Hermeticism, blending Christian theology with Neoplatonism, astrology, and Kabbalah. These works promise that man was not merely a passive subject of fate, but a being capable of transforming himself, even of attaining a godlike state of knowledge. This vision resonated deeply with alchemists, who saw the refining of metals as an allegory for the purification of the soul. By the time Freemasonry began to take its modern form in the 17th and 18th centuries, these hermetic ideas had seeped into the intellectual soil of Europe. Alchemy, in particular, became a recurring theme in Masonic imagination. The transmutation of lead into gold was never only about metal. It was about spiritual progress, the transformation of the base man into a perfected being. Some Masonic writers spoke openly of the fraternity as a kind of philosophical laboratory, where the rough stone of the human soul is shaped into the perfect ashlar. This language mirrors alchemical texts, which describe the alchemist's task as both chemical and spiritual. Even the legend of Hiram Abiff, slain builder of Solomon's temple, bears a symbolic kinship with alchemical death and rebirth motifs, in which the material must first be broken down before it can be refined. Magic, too, found its subtle place within the lodge. Not the stage magic of sleight of hand, but the deeper sense of magic as described by Renaissance magi, the manipulation of symbols and forces to bring the soul closer to the divine. The rituals of Masonry, with their dramatic gestures, sacred words, and ceremonial objects, can be seen as a form of symbolic magic. The initiate is led through darkness into light, enacting a transformation that is less about social fraternity and more about inner awakening. To the rational Enlightenment mind, these ceremonies might appear as moral allegories. To the esoteric initiate, there were operations of the hidden arts. Kabbalah exerted its own influence, especially through the fascination with the Temple of Solomon. The structure of the lodge itself, divided into symbolic sections and aligned to the cardinal points, echoes the cosmological patterns described in Jewish mysticism. The ineffable name of God, lost and rediscovered in certain Masonic degrees, bears striking resemblance to the Kabbalistic quest for the hidden divine word that sustains creation. For those versed in mysticism, these were not coincidences. They were clues, suggesting that Masonry was part of an unbroken chain of wisdom stretching back through Hermeticism, Kabbalah, and even the ancient mysteries of Egypt and Greece. This interpretation only deepened with the rise of the Rosicrucian movement. The Rosicrucian manifestos of the early 17th century promised a secret brotherhood of enlightened men, custodians of hidden knowledge blending alchemy, magic, and science. Although the Rosicrucian order was more legend than organization, its myths inspired generations of seekers, and its symbols and ideas flowed naturally into Masonic circles. By the 18th century, some lodges openly incorporated Rosicrucian degrees, weaving the language of hidden masters and secret sciences into Masonic progression. To critics, this was proof that Masonry trafficked in occult deception. To initiates, it was an intoxicating mixture of spiritual poetry and moral instruction. Yet one must be careful not to overstate the case. Many Freemasons were, and are, practical men of the world, uninterested in occult speculation. For them, Masonry is a fraternity of fellowship and charity, not a gateway to hermetic mysteries. The blending of Masonic ritual with alchemical or magical ideas often depended on the interests of individual lodges or influential authors. In France and Germany, particularly, the 18th century saw an explosion of Masonic rites with heavy occult coloring. Some claimed to reveal the lost wisdom of the Egyptians. Others promised initiation into the secrets of the Rosicrucians. Still others claimed to guard the Templar mysteries. Each system embroidered the basic fabric of Masonry with threads of esoteric imagination, creating a dazzling and confusing tapestry. This fusion of Masonry and the occult reached a peak in the 19th century, when the occult revival swept across Europe. Figures like Eliphas Levi drew heavily on Masonic symbolism in their magical systems, treating the compass, square, and blazing star as keys to Hermetic wisdom. Later, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn borrowed not only rituals but also the structural model of the lodge from Masonry, blending it with astrology, tarot, and angelic invocations. To the public, Masonry became inseparable from the larger occult underground, whether or not most Masons themselves endorse such interpretations. The blending of the craft with esotericism produced both fascination and fear. Admirers saw Masonry as a living remnant of the ancient mysteries, a spiritual path disguised as fraternity. Critics, especially religious authorities, condemned it as sorcery cloaked in brotherhood, a dangerous counterfeit of true religion. To this day, anti-Masonic writers point to the hermetic and alchemical echoes within the lodge as evidence of its corruption. They claim that behind the mask of moral allegory lies the practice of forbidden arts. But perhaps the truth is subtler. Masonry does not practice alchemy in the literal sense, nor does it openly teach magic in the Hermetic tradition. What it does is preserve symbols that resonate with a universal human desire for transformation, wisdom, and divine connection. Whether one calls that alchemy, magic, or simply metaphor depends on perspective. The square and compass are tools of building, yes, but they are also symbols of the eternal human quest to shape the self, to measure one's life against the mysteries of the universe. Thus, the occult connection is less a hidden conspiracy than a reflection of Masonry's porous boundaries. It absorbed the intellectual currents of its age, and in doing so, became a mirror for humanity's deepest longings. For some, it was fellowship. For others, it was philosophy. For still others, it was the secret path of the magus. The lodge could be all these things at once, depending on the eyes of the beholder. And so the question lingers, does Masonry conceal ancient magical secrets, or does it merely borrow the imagery of the occult to enrich its moral theater? The answer, as with much in Masonry, lies not in a single revelation but in the endless interplay of symbol and interpretation. The craft never insists on one truth. It invites the initiate to find his own. While Freemasonry's rituals and symbols were cloaked in allegory, the fraternity could not escape the real-world consequences of its influence. As men gathered in large rooms across Europe and the Americas, discussing virtue, liberty, and brotherhood, they often discovered that these moral lessons could not remain isolated from the tumultuous societies around them. Ideals once confined to symbolic squares and compasses became sparks in powder magazines, and lodges found themselves at the center of political firestorms that would reshape nations. In revolutionary France, the connection between Freemasonry and politics was both intimate and dangerous. Lodges were not explicitly political, but they provided spaces where ideas of equality and fraternity could circulate freely. Nobles rubbed elbows with bourgeois reformers, soldiers with scholars, and all were bound by the same oaths of secrecy and loyalty to the craft. Within these walls, the principles of liberty, echoed in the slogans Libet, Égalité, Fraternite, were rehearsed long before they roared through the streets of Paris. Historians suggest that the conversations and networks formed in Masonic lodges helped facilitate revolutionary coordination, even if the fraternity itself did not issue manifestos or armies. The perception of Masonry as a revolutionary force, however, took on a life of its own. Monarchs and church leaders, already wary of secret societies, began to conflate Masonic fellowship with sedition. The storming of the Bastille in 1789, the execution of King Louis XVI, and the Reign of Terror fueled narratives that painted Masons as the invisible architects of chaos. Whether justified or not, the reputation stuck. Conspiracy theories flourished, claiming that Masons had infiltrated parliaments, courts, and revolutionary committees, guiding the course of events from behind closed doors. In America, the story took a slightly different form. The young republic was built by men who were often Freemasons themselves. George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Paul Revere, figures central to the revolution, bore the marks of the craft. For many, Masonry symbolized civic virtue, moral instruction, and enlightened leadership. Lodge rituals reinforced ideals of equality, justice, and brotherhood, and these principles naturally found expression in the framing of the new nation. The symbolism of Masonic architecture, from the laying of cornerstones to the use of the all-seeing eye on the Great Seal, became intertwined with the narrative of a republic founded on reason and moral principle. Yet even in America, suspicion simmered beneath the surface. When William Morgan threatened to expose Masonic secrets in 1826, the resulting outrage gave rise to the Anti-Masonic Party, the first third-party movement in U.S. politics. Suddenly, the fraternity's long tradition of secrecy was interpreted as evidence of political plotting and moral corruption. Newspapers printed sensational accounts of hidden rites, ominous oaths, and clandestine influence. Lodges became battlegrounds, not only of moral instruction but also of public perception, caught between admiration and fear. The political firestorm surrounding Masonry was not solely about revolution or ideology. It was about power and trust. The fraternity structure, with its networks spanning regions and classes, allowed for rapid communication and coordination, a feature invaluable in times of social upheaval. Letters, coded symbols, and personal introductions created connections that were invisible to outsiders. This organizational capacity could be used for charity, intellectual exchange, or, in the eyes of critics, manipulation and subversion. The ambiguity fueled both fascination and paranoia. In continental Europe, the Napoleonic era intensified these tensions. Napoleon Bonaparte himself was associated with Masonic lodges, though whether as a member or an affiliate remains debated. His conquests spread revolutionary ideals across the continent, and lodges sometimes acted as nodes of communication for those who embraced Enlightenment principles. Governments attempting to reassert control often outlawed lodges, yet the fraternity persisted, adapting to new political realities while maintaining its secrecy. In Spain, Italy, and Austria, Masonic lodges were viewed alternately as patriotic hubs or subversive cells, depending on the observer's perspective. Masonry's association with revolution also carried personal risk for its members. In France, during the Terror, Masons could not rely on their fraternity to shield them. Loyalty to the craft did not exempt anyone from the guillotine. In some cases, the very symbols that inspired civic virtue could be interpreted as sedition. A square or compass, innocuous in one context, became a mark of defiance in another. The same held true in other nations where revolutions and counter-revolutions unfolded. To be a Mason was to navigate a delicate balance between moral allegory and political reality. Yet this delicate balance was part of Masonry's enduring appeal. The fraternity offered a space where ideals could be rehearsed, refined, and internalized before being expressed in the turbulent outside world. Its rituals taught discipline, its symbols taught morality, and its networks taught connection. When political upheaval arrived, men who had internalized these lessons were equipped to act, sometimes in ways that inspired liberty, sometimes in ways that drew suspicion. The duality is central to understanding the craft's role in history, simultaneously a school of virtue and a magnet for fear. Even as governments sought to suppress lodges or regulate their activities, Masonry adapted. Secret rituals continued behind closed doors. Symbols were encoded in architecture and art. Oaths and passwords preserved bonds that could survive political persecution. In this way, the fraternity not only weathered revolutions but also helped shape them, leaving traces in constitutions, public ceremonies, and civic architecture. Its influence was subtle, often indirect, but enduring. By the end of the 18th century, the image of Freemasonry as both moral fraternity and potential revolutionary force had solidified. Supporters celebrated it as a network of enlightened citizens committed to virtue and progress. Critics painted it as a hidden engine of upheaval, a clandestine order with the power to challenge kings, churches, and nations. This dual perception, of noble intention and latent menace, would continue to define Masonry in the centuries that followed. Ultimately, Freemasonry's entanglement with revolution demonstrates a fundamental truth about secret societies. They exist in tension with the wider world. Their teachings, symbols, and networks can inspire courage and civic virtue, but they can also provoke fear and suspicion. For Masons, the challenge was, and remains, to uphold their moral and philosophical ideals while navigating the turbulent currents of human history. The political firestorm surrounding the craft reminds us that symbols, allegories, and oaths are never entirely private. They resonate beyond the lodge, influencing perception, policy, and power. And in that resonance lies both the fascination and the danger of Freemasonry, a fraternity capable of shaping men's minds, their communities, and, perhaps, the course of history itself. For centuries, Freemasonry was a world firmly reserved for men. Lodge doors closed behind initiates, oaths sworn, and secrets passed hand to hand. Yet the allure of the craft, and the mystery surrounding its symbols and rituals, was impossible to ignore. Women, intellectuals, and outsiders, intrigued by its teachings and its reputation, began to imagine what lay behind those closed doors. In some cases, they sought access. In others, they created parallel societies, mirroring Masonic principles while challenging its gender exclusivity. The first known attempts to involve women in Masonry date back to the 18th century. In France, amid the fervor of Enlightenment salons, certain lodges experimented with adoption lodges, spaces where female relatives of Masons could participate in adapted rituals. These lodges did not grant traditional Masonic degrees, but they offered structured ceremonies, moral instruction, and opportunities for social engagement. Women learned the symbolism of the craft, performed allegorical plays, and engaged in charitable activities, creating a space that reflected the moral and philosophical ideals of the fraternity, if not its formal hierarchy. These adoption lodges were met with curiosity, amusement, and often scorn. Traditional Masons viewed female lodges as theatrical experiments, peripheral to the true craft. Yet for participants, the experience was empowering. Women could explore philosophy, symbolism, and civic virtue in a structured environment, participating in the intellectual currents that their male counterparts navigated within traditional lodges. In some ways, these parallel societies foreshadowed the broader movements for women's rights and inclusion in public life. In England, similar experiments emerged in the 19th century. Female lodges, sometimes called lodges of adoption or co-Freemasonry, attracted progressive thinkers and philanthropists. They embraced Masonic ritual while emphasizing moral development, charity, and personal growth. Initiates could advance through degrees, learn symbolic languages, and engage in the communal experience that Freemasonry offered, though always on the margins of official male lodges. The secrecy, ritual, and structure mirrored mainstream Masonry closely enough to maintain legitimacy. But the existence of these lodges also hinted at the tensions surrounding gender, power, and access in a world dominated by male authority. Parallel to these developments, Freemasonry's exclusivity fueled speculation and myth. Outsiders, novelists, journalists, and conspiracy theorists imagined hidden societies where women held secret power, manipulated Masonic networks, or accessed forbidden knowledge denied to men. Rumors circulated of female Grand Masters, secret rites of immense potency, and occult knowledge preserved through matrilineal lines. While these tales were largely fanciful, they reveal how secrecy can ignite imagination. The craft's walls not only protected ritual, they also created a fertile ground for myth-making. The fascination with outsiders did not stop at women. Intellectuals, political dissidents, and religious critics all speculated on Masonry's hidden networks. Could a lodge serve as a training ground for political rebellion, a sanctuary for heretical thought, or even a forum for clandestine commerce? The answer, as always, was complex. Lodges did provide networks, communication channels, and moral instruction. Yet they were also social spaces, filled with men of diverse political, religious, and philosophical views, often emphasizing harmony over action. The perceived power of the craft frequently exceeded its practical influence. Nonetheless, the existence of female or co-Masonic lodges demonstrated an essential point. The principles of Masonry, moral allegory, symbolic instruction, and fraternal bond, were not inherently male. Women's lodges adapted rituals, created degrees, and mirrored symbolism, showing that the core teachings could transcend gender, even if traditional lodges resisted full integration. These societies became laboratories for experimentation, preserving Masonic ideals while subtly challenging the fraternity's boundaries. Parallel societies also served as protective spaces for intellectual exchange. Women and outsiders, often excluded from formal political or academic institutions, could explore philosophy, ethics, and civic virtue in environments inspired by Masonic structure. They could debate, enact allegorical plays, and learn symbolism that reflected both moral and mystical ideas. In this way, Masonry's influence extended far beyond its official membership, shaping minds and communities in ways that were never officially sanctioned. Yet, the tension between inclusion and secrecy remained. Masonic lodges emphasized oaths, degrees, and exclusive knowledge. By creating parallel societies, outsiders acknowledged the power of that secrecy while also seeking to claim some portion of it for themselves. The existence of adoption lodges, co-Masonic lodges, and informal circles of study demonstrates that the pull of Masonic ideas was universal, even when the formal fraternity resisted expansion. Public fascination, rumor, and imagination amplified the mystique. The idea of hidden female lodges, secret networks of outsiders, or shadowy groups operating alongside traditional Masonry contributed to the broader mythology of the craft. Books, pamphlets, and later novels depicted these groups as wielders of subtle influence, manipulators of events, and guardians of forbidden knowledge. While historically inaccurate in many cases, such narratives reinforce the idea that Freemasonry existed not just as a fraternity but as a symbol of hidden potential, hidden knowledge, and hidden power. In essence, the emergence of women, outsiders, and parallel societies illustrates a central tension in Masonry: the allure of inclusion versus the power of secrecy. The fraternity's rituals and symbols invite participation, but its closed doors protect the mystery. The attempts of outsiders to gain access, adapt rituals, and create alternative structures reveal the strength of that allure. Even as official lodges maintained male exclusivity, the spirit of Masonry found expression beyond the walls, proving that ideas, like light from a blazing star, cannot be fully contained. By the early 20th century, co-Masonic and female lodges had gained formal recognition in some countries, though they remained marginal compared to traditional lodges. Their existence, however, challenged assumptions about who could participate in the symbolic, moral, and even mystical worlds of Masonry. In doing so, they expanded the narrative of the craft, showing that its influence could ripple outward in unexpected directions. The interplay between secrecy, inclusion, and myth continues today. Outsiders remain fascinated, curious, and occasionally fearful. Women's lodges demonstrate the adaptability of the craft's principles, and the stories, both real and imagined, ensure that Masonry remains a source of intrigue, discussion, and speculation. In this way, the fraternity's influence extends beyond membership roles, reaching anyone willing to explore its symbols, reflect on its allegories, or imagine the possibilities hidden behind closed doors. The lesson is clear: Masonry's mysteries are not confined to male lodges. They exist wherever the symbols are studied, wherever the allegories are enacted, and wherever curiosity is permitted to flourish. And it is that enduring power of imagination, more than any ritual or oath, that continues to define the craft in the eyes of the world. Freemasonry, at its heart, is a fraternity of builders. Its language is filled with the tools of construction: the square, the compass, the level, the plumb line. These instruments are not merely symbolic. They reflect the fraternity's deep connection to geometry, proportion, and the physical act of building. From the earliest lodges to the grand temples of the 19th century, Masonic principles shaped the spaces where men gathered. But their influence did not stop at lodge walls. Across cities and continents, Masonic ideas left an indelible imprint on architecture, blending symbolism, ritual, and civic vision into the very stones of the world. In lodge buildings themselves, Masonic symbolism is impossible to miss for those who know where to look. Pillars stand at the entrance, recalling Jachin and Boaz from Solomon's Temple. The all-seeing eye is often positioned above entrances or in central chambers, a reminder of divine oversight and moral vigilance. Ceilings may be adorned with stars or intricate geometric patterns, echoing the celestial aspirations of the craft. Every element, from floor tiles to staircases, carries meaning, symbols of virtue, morality, and spiritual ascent, deliberately designed to guide the mind of the initiate through the moral allegory of the lodge. But Masonic influence extends beyond the lodge. Architects and builders who were Masons often incorporated symbolic elements into public buildings, churches, and civic spaces. In Europe, 18th and 19th century town halls, universities, and even bridges reflect a fascination with geometry, symmetry, and the proportional harmony that is central to Masonic thought. For example, the use of pyramids, domes, and columns can often be traced back to Masonic ideals of structural and moral balance, a visual language that conveys stability, order, and enlightenment. In the United States, Masonic influence is perhaps most visible in cornerstone ceremonies. When a significant building was erected, a master mason might preside over the laying of the cornerstone, complete with ritual, prayers, and symbolic objects such as Bibles, trowels, or ceremonial tools. These ceremonies were more than ceremonial. They were performative acts of moral and civic education. They symbolically laid the foundation not just for a building, but for the community's shared values and aspirations. The use of geometric precision, alignment, and symbolic tools reinforced the idea that both structures and societies could be built with order, justice, and care. Washington, D.C., is a city where Masonic influence is woven into its very design. L'Enfant's city plan, with its grand avenues, radiating streets, and sightlines connecting monuments, resonates with the principles of geometry and cosmic order celebrated in Masonic teachings. Monuments such as the Capitol, the White House, and the Washington Monument incorporate symbolic numbers, alignments, and proportions that echo Masonic and Enlightenment ideals. Whether by design or serendipity, the city embodies the fraternity's fascination with order, symbolism, and moral architecture. Beyond monumental architecture, Masonic symbolism can also be found in smaller civic structures. Public libraries, bridges, and even cemeteries feature motifs like the square and compass, the level, and the plumb line. These symbols are subtle, often overlooked by the casual observer, but they carry profound meaning. They suggest that the values of Masonry, truth, balance, virtue, and diligence, are meant to guide society as a whole, not merely the initiates within lodge walls. Some historians argue that this influence extends to city planning itself. The idea of aligning streets, monuments, and public spaces with geometric precision reflects the Masonic worldview, in which harmony, proportion, and symbolism guide human endeavors. In cities across Europe and the Americas, planners and architects who were Masons integrated these principles into urban design, creating spaces that encourage contemplation, order, and civic pride. In this sense, Masonry's architectural legacy is not just aesthetic. It is philosophical, aiming to shape the moral and intellectual environment of communities. Temples built in the 19th and early 20th centuries, especially in North America, became architectural marvels. Massive domes, intricate stonework, stained glass windows, and lavish interiors transformed lodges into cathedrals of fraternity. They were designed to inspire awe, reflecting both the cosmic symbolism of Masonry and the civic pride of the communities that built them. These temples were not secret in their presence. They were monuments to moral and civic ideals, yet their internal rituals remained hidden, enhancing the mystique of the craft. Masonic architecture also often incorporates symbolic numerology. Numbers like 3, 5, 7, and 12 recur in design elements, referencing degrees, virtues, or allegorical meanings. Staircases, arches, and windows may be arranged to reflect these numbers, creating a subtle yet pervasive symbolic language. For those initiated, these patterns reinforce the moral and philosophical teachings of the fraternity. For outsiders, they evoke mystery and curiosity, contributing to the perception of Masonry as a society with hidden knowledge embedded even in the built environment. European lodges, particularly in France, England, and Germany, showcase the blending of neoclassical and Gothic elements with Masonic symbolism. Columns, pediments, and porticos recall the grandeur of ancient temples, while interior chambers are meticulously aligned with ritual spaces and symbolic focal points. Decorative motifs, rosettes, suns, stars, and checkerboard floors are carefully chosen to guide moral reflection and create a psychological environment conducive to allegorical learning. These lodges are not simply meeting spaces. They are immersive experiences, where architecture, symbolism, and ritual converge. Even public buildings inspired by Masonic aesthetics carry an invisible message. Courthouses, city halls, and universities often echo Masonic geometry and proportion, subtly instilling values of justice, balance, and order. By embedding these symbols in civic spaces, architects and patrons extended Masonic ideals beyond the lodge, creating an environment in which the philosophy of the craft could influence society indirectly. In this way, Masonry becomes not only a private fraternity but also a cultural force shaping urban life and collective consciousness. Yet the influence of Masonic architecture is double-edged. While it celebrates order, morality, and enlightenment, it also reinforces the perception of secrecy and hidden knowledge. The carefully aligned columns, the symbolic numerology, the dramatic use of light and shadow, all contribute to an air of mystery. Outsiders may see not just beauty but enigma, suspecting hidden messages, secret codes, or clandestine rituals. In this way, the very structures meant to embody virtue also fuel intrigue, adding to the mythology surrounding Freemasonry. Ultimately, Masonic influence on architecture demonstrates the fraternity's enduring fascination with the intersection of material and moral building. Lodges, monuments, and public spaces alike reflect an ethic in which geometry, proportion, and symbolism serve as vehicles for moral and civic instruction. Masonry teaches that to construct wisely in stone is to construct wisely in life. The act of building is inseparable from the act of shaping character and society. Through its temples and the spaces it inspired, Freemasonry left a lasting imprint on cities, communities, and imaginations worldwide. Its architecture is both literal and symbolic, a testament to human aspiration, an emblem of moral teaching, and a canvas upon which mystery and secrecy can flourish. Visitors may admire the beauty, ponder the symbolism, or speculate on hidden meanings, but the legacy is undeniable. Masonry shaped not only its members but also the very spaces in which society moves, works, and dreams. One glance at a Masonic lodge or its associated architecture reveals a world steeped in symbolism. But Masonry's influence extends far beyond the walls of temples and lodges, infiltrating art, literature, public monuments, and even the emblems of states. Squares, compasses, all-seeing eyes, pillars, and checkerboard floors are not merely decorative. They are moral and philosophical signposts intended to instruct, inspire, and remind initiates of the principles they are sworn to uphold. Yet to outsiders, these symbols can appear enigmatic, even sinister, and their ubiquity has fueled centuries of fascination, rumor, and conspiracy theory. The square and compass remain the most recognizable Masonic symbols, appearing on everything from lapel pins to cornerstone engravings. The square reminds the initiate to act with virtue, ensuring that one's actions are square with morality and truth. The compass symbolizes boundaries, guiding men to measure their desires, control their impulses, and navigate ethical dilemmas. Together, they form a visual shorthand for Masonic philosophy, moral precision, spiritual guidance, and disciplined growth. For Masons, these symbols are practical reminders. For the curious outsider, they can feel like a secret code embedded in the fabric of society. The all-seeing eye, often perched atop pyramids or embossed on documents, is perhaps the most provocative of Masonic emblems. Rooted in Enlightenment and Christian iconography, it represents divine watchfulness, the eye of God observing human actions. Yet its placement on public monuments, currency, and government buildings has invited speculation. Some see it as a benign symbol of oversight, while others read it as evidence of hidden influence, a silent witness to secret agendas. The duality of meaning, both moral guidance and perceived surveillance, adds to the aura of mystery surrounding the craft. Pillars, particularly the twin columns of Jachin and Boaz, recur in Masonic art and architecture. They evoke Solomon's temple and symbolize strength and stability. Yet in paintings, engravings, and public sculptures, they also serve as allegorical markers, reminding viewers of balance, duality, and the integration of opposites. From a Masonic perspective, These symbols encourage reflection on virtue and the structure of the moral universe. To conspiracy theorists, however, they hint at coded messages or hidden networks, a silent language of the initiated embedded in plain sight. Checkerboard floors, commonly found in large rooms, carry rich symbolic significance. The alternating black and white tiles represent the duality of human experience, good and evil, light and darkness, joy and sorrow. Walking across this pattern during ritual, the initiate is reminded of the moral choices that shape life's path. Outside the lodge, checkerboard motifs appear in churches, civic spaces, and even literature, extending Masonic ideas into the cultural landscape. Their presence often goes unnoticed by the uninitiated, yet they reflect a subtle insistence that moral awareness permeates daily life. Masonic symbolism is not limited to architecture. In literature, secret codes and allegorical motifs echo Masonic teachings. Enlightenment thinkers and novelists, some Masons themselves, embedded philosophical lessons in narrative form. Characters, plot structures, and symbolic objects mirror the moral and philosophical principles of the craft. This interweaving of symbols and story reinforces the perception of Masonry as a hidden network of wisdom, accessible to those who know how to read the signs. Art also carries Masonic influence, both explicitly and covertly. Paintings, sculptures, and engravings often depict symbolic tools, celestial imagery, or allegorical figures drawn from lodge ritual. For the public, these images can appear decorative or mysterious. For the initiated, they reinforce lessons learned in the lodge, offering a visual continuation of moral and philosophical education. Even coinage and national emblems sometimes incorporate subtle references, extending the craft's reach into everyday life. The ubiquity of these symbols has long fueled speculation and conspiracy. Observers have claimed to see Masonic influence in the layout of capitals, the design of banknotes, and the orientation of monuments. Some theorists argue that the repetition of these symbols indicates covert coordination, a secret hand guiding society's structures and values. While most of these claims lack evidence, their persistence reflects the human tendency to see pattern and intention, especially in the presence of symbols whose meanings are partially hidden. Even ordinary gestures and tools carry symbolic weight. The handshake, for instance, serves as both greeting and affirmation of secrecy. Ritual objects, trowels, gavels, aprons, and sashes encode lessons of morality, service, and responsibility. The symbolism is not arbitrary. It is carefully curated to teach, reinforce, and remind. Yet when these objects appear outside the lodge, observers may misinterpret their function, further enhancing the mystique of Masonry as a secret society operating behind the veil of normal life. Some symbols evolved over time, absorbing layers of cultural and historical meaning. The pentagram, once a protective emblem, became associated with occultism and fear in popular imagination. The sun, moon, and stars, central in Masonic allegory, link human aspiration to cosmic order, reminding initiates that moral growth is part of a larger universal design. When these symbols appear in public spaces or art, they carry multiple interpretations: philosophical, spiritual, and occasionally conspiratorial. The persistence of Masonic symbols in public consciousness underscores their power. Even without formal initiation, the human mind responds to images, patterns, and coded forms. Symbols invite curiosity, interpretation, and storytelling. They provoke questions. Why here? Why now? Why these shapes? In answering, observers engage with the moral, philosophical, and aesthetic dimensions of Masonry, even if they never enter a lodge. In this sense, Masonry symbols act as bridges between the secretive and the public, the private moral training and the cultural imagination. They are at once educational tools, aesthetic elements, and instruments of mystery. Their presence in art, literature, architecture, and everyday life ensures that Masonry's influence persists, shaping thought, inspiring wonder, and sparking speculation. Ultimately, the power of Masonic symbolism lies in its dual nature: to educate the initiate and to intrigue the outsider. Squares and compasses, all-seeing eyes, pillars, and checkerboards. They are both signs of moral guidance and catalysts of imagination. Their ubiquity ensures that Masonry's lessons, real or imagined, extend far beyond lodge walls into the collective consciousness of societies, cities, and cultures. Symbols, codes, and hidden messages are the language of Freemasonry. They speak to those who study, interpret, and reflect, yet they leave space for wonder and speculation. And it is precisely this interplay of revelation and mystery that has cemented Masonry's enduring place in history. A society of builders, philosophers, and visionaries whose symbols continue to whisper secrets into the world, waiting to be understood or misread by all who encounter them. Throughout history, Freemasonry has counted among its members some of the most influential figures in politics, science, literature, and philosophy. From the architects of nations to celebrated artists, Masons have left footprints both visible and hidden in the course of human events. Their membership in the craft, cloaked in secrecy and ritual, has often fueled speculation. Did their Masonic ties influence their decisions? Were the principles of Masonry guiding revolutions, shaping governments, or inspiring cultural achievements? While answers are rarely simple, the stories of these men reveal the quiet yet profound reach of the fraternity. In the United States, George Washington is perhaps the most emblematic figure. As a master Mason, Washington's membership was not a secret, yet it remains a subject of fascination. His careful attention to Masonic ritual and symbolism is evident in cornerstone ceremonies, his design choices for public spaces, and his advocacy for civic virtue. Washington's involvement suggests a blending of personal moral philosophy with public action, emphasizing ideals of leadership, honesty, and civic responsibility. While it is unlikely that Masonry dictated policy, it offered a framework for character and governance that influenced his decisions and legacy. Benjamin Franklin, another towering figure of American history, combined Masonic membership with his intellectual pursuits, diplomacy, and civic activism. Franklin's lodges provided venues for discussion and networking, linking men of diverse backgrounds in pursuit of knowledge and improvement. The Masonic ethos of education, virtue, and moral development appears woven into Franklin's writings, inventions, and public initiatives. In this sense, the fraternity functioned as both a community of support and a philosophical guide, helping him navigate complex political and social challenges. Paul Revere, famous for his midnight ride, also exemplifies the influence of Masonic networks. Lodges connected artisans, tradesmen, and civic leaders, facilitating communication and coordination during the Revolutionary era. While Revere's ride and the broader mobilization of colonial resistance were matters of political necessity, Masonic bonds may have strengthened trust and collaboration, enhancing effectiveness. The intersection of fraternity, moral instruction, and civic action is evident in these examples, suggesting that Masonry's influence often operated subtly, shaping character and networks rather than dictating policy. Across the Atlantic, Masonic membership included monarchs, military leaders, and reformers. The Marquis de Lafayette, instrumental in both the American and French revolutions, was a Mason whose ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity resonate with Masonic teachings. In France, figures such as Voltaire and other intellectuals associated with Masonic lodges blended Enlightenment philosophy with the ethical and moral framework of the craft. Lodges functioned as spaces for debate, intellectual development, and moral reinforcement, contributing to broader currents of political and cultural transformation. Artists and writers were not immune to Masonic influence either. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, whose operas and compositions brim with symbolic references, was a dedicated Mason. His music often reflects Masonic ideals of virtue, harmony, and enlightenment. Rituals, allegories, and philosophical teachings of the craft appear in works such as the Magic Flute, embedding ethical and moral lessons within art. Mozart's example illustrates how Masonry's teachings could inspire not only political actors but cultural creators, shaping art that endures across centuries. Other figures, such as Winston Churchill, Simon Bolivar, and Rudyard Kipling, carried the principles of Masonry into diverse arenas. Churchill's early membership emphasized discipline, leadership, and moral fortitude. Bolivar's revolutionary vision echoed ideals of liberty and fraternity. Kipling's writings reveal Masonic allegories and ethical motifs. While the precise impact of membership is difficult to quantify, these examples suggest that the craft functioned as a moral compass, a network, and a source of inspiration, quietly guiding actions and decisions. The influence of famous Masons extends beyond the individual. Networks of lodges provided communication channels across regions, connecting men of shared principles and values. Letters, symbols, and personal introductions enabled collaboration that could transcend social, political, and geographic boundaries. These networks often fostered trust and mutual understanding, allowing Masonic principles to ripple outward into society, subtly shaping political decisions, philanthropic projects, and cultural achievements. Yet the public perception of Masonic influence is often more dramatic than reality. Conspiracy theories abound, claiming secret directives, hidden agendas, or coordinated action among high-ranking Masons. While some networks may have facilitated discussion or cooperation, there is little concrete evidence of a centralized Masonic plan shaping historical events. What is clear, however, is the moral, philosophical, and social influence of the fraternity, guiding members to act according to shared ideals of virtue, justice, and fraternity. Freemasonry's emphasis on secrecy amplifies fascination. The rituals, oaths, and private ceremonies associated with membership lend an aura of hidden influence. Outsiders often assume that the mere presence of prominent figures in the fraternity equates to clandestine coordination or manipulation. Yet in many cases, the influence is subtler. Masonic teachings inform character, inspire civic engagement, and reinforce ethical decision-making. The power lies not in coercion but in moral alignment and shared principles. Philanthropy is another arena where Masonic influence manifests. Many prominent Masons champion charitable causes, public institutions, and social reforms. Hospitals, schools, libraries, and civic projects often benefited from Masonic support, whether through funding, advocacy, or leadership. The fraternity's teachings of service, justice, and benevolence are reflected in these tangible contributions, demonstrating influence that is both visible and enduring. The global spread of Masonry also amplifies the influence of individual members. Lodges in Europe, the Americas, Asia, and Africa provide frameworks for ethical leadership, civic engagement, and intellectual exploration. Famous Masons, through their writings, public actions, and mentorship, extend these principles to wider audiences. Their lives become case studies in how Masonic ideals can intersect with history, leaving a legacy that resonates far beyond the walls of any single lodge. Ultimately, the story of famous Masons illustrates the dual nature of influence. On one hand, secrecy and ritual create intrigue, inspiring myths and conspiracy theories. On the other, principles, networks, and moral instruction provide a quieter, more profound effect, shaping character, fostering collaboration, and encouraging civic virtue. The combination of mystery and moral guidance is what makes the fraternity both fascinating and enduring. In the end, the hidden influence of Freemasonry is less about secret orders dictating global events and more about the shaping of men who, in turn, shape history. The ethical frameworks, philosophical teachings, and fraternal networks embedded in the craft ripple outward, influencing decisions, inspiring action, and leaving a lasting imprint on human society. Whether through revolutionary leadership, cultural achievement, or civic engagement, the legacy of famous Masons endures, proving that sometimes the most profound power lies not in overt control, but in the quiet shaping of minds and hearts. Throughout its history, Freemasonry has been shrouded in myth, rumor, and controversy. Its secrecy, elaborate rituals, and network of influence created fertile ground for suspicion, generating stories that range from the merely curious to the outright alarming. Critics accuse the fraternity of hidden agendas, moral corruption, and even diabolical conspiracy. While many of these claims were exaggerated or outright false, they fueled public fear and fascination, shaping the cultural perception of Masonry and leaving a lasting mark on history. One of the earliest and most famous scandals was the disappearance of William Morgan in 1826 in the United States. Morgan, a former Mason, threatened to publish the secrets of the fraternity. Shortly thereafter, he vanished under mysterious circumstances. Public outrage was immediate, and newspapers sensationalized the event, suggesting that Masons had orchestrated his disappearance to protect their secrets. Whether the fraternity was involved remains uncertain, but the incident gave rise to the anti-Masonic Party, the first third-party movement in American politics. The Morgan affair illustrates how secrecy combined with rumor can ignite moral panic, with consequences reaching far beyond the lodge. In Europe, similar anxieties arose. Monarchs and religious authorities often viewed lodges as subversive. The combination of oaths, clandestine meetings, and political engagement sparked fear that Masons were undermining traditional authority. Pope Clement XII's 1738 papal bull condemning Freemasonry warned that the fraternity could corrupt morals and threaten church authority. Similar proclamations followed in other countries, reflecting a pattern. Secrecy, unfamiliar rituals, and transnational networks bred suspicion, even when evidence of wrongdoing was minimal or non-existent. Freemasonry's association with revolutions further fueled public fear. In France, during the late 18th century, lodges were accused of nurturing revolutionary sentiment. Observers argued that secret networks of Masons had infiltrated government, military, and intellectual circles, orchestrating upheaval. While lodges certainly provided spaces for discussion and networking, the idea of a monolithic Masonic conspiracy controlling political events was largely mythologized. Yet the perception persisted, shaping public imagination and feeding sensationalist accounts in newspapers, pamphlets, and books. Literature and art amplified these fears. Gothic novels, political pamphlets, and sensationalist journalism often depicted Masons as shadowy manipulators of society. From secretive hands guiding monarchs to clandestine rituals with sinister overtones, these stories captured the imagination of the public. In some cases, the embellishments were so persuasive that they became part of collective memory, reinforcing suspicion of the craft even among those with no personal experience of it. Scandals and rumors were not limited to political or religious fears. Allegations of immoral behavior, occult practices, or clandestine rites circulated widely. Critics claimed that initiates were coerced into secrecy, that rituals concealed blasphemous acts, or that the fraternity protected its own members from justice. While most of these allegations were based on misunderstanding or exaggeration, they contributed to a climate in which Masonry was alternately revered, feared, and vilified. The mystique of the hidden reinforced the idea that Masons were not merely a fraternity but a secret society with power beyond public accountability. Masonic secrecy itself contributed to the spread of myths. The very mechanisms designed to create trust and solidarity among members, oaths, passwords, and degrees, made outsiders suspicious. Human psychology tends to fill gaps in knowledge with speculation, and when symbols, rituals, or networks are misunderstood, the imagination often conjures conspiracy. Stories of invisible hierarchies, secret influence, and hidden agendas thrive precisely because the fraternity's inner workings were closed to the uninitiated. Public scandals, too, were amplified by individual ambition or political expedience. Leaders and writers sometimes weaponized anti-Masonic sentiment to achieve power, discredit opponents, or rally public opinion. Accusations were convenient tools, and the aura of secrecy surrounding lodges made such claims plausible, even without solid evidence. Over time, these scandals layered upon one another, creating a rich tapestry of suspicion that persists in some form even today. The interplay between truth and myth is particularly evident in popular conspiracy theories. Some claim that Masons secretly control banks, governments, or global events. Others suggest that hidden symbols in architecture, art, or currency indicate clandestine influence. While most of these theories lack verifiable evidence, they are rooted in real elements of Masonic culture, secrecy, symbolism, networks, and a history of engagement with politics, philosophy, and civic life. The line between legitimate influence and imagined conspiracy is blurred, and that ambiguity has always fueled fascination. Masonry scandals also reflect human tension with secrecy and power. Societies tend to fear what they cannot see or understand. When rituals are hidden, when membership is selective, and when symbols carry layered meaning, the mind fills in gaps with suspicion. This is as true for early modern Europe as it is for contemporary society. In every era, secrecy has both protected the fraternity's internal cohesion and sparked anxiety among outsiders. Yet amidst myth and scandal, there is a persistent thread of reality. Lodges have occasionally failed to live up to their own moral ideals. Individuals have misused networks for personal gain. These instances, however, are often exaggerated in public discourse. The balance between genuine critique and sensationalized fear is delicate, and history has repeatedly tilted toward myth, creating a perception of Masonry as simultaneously virtuous, mysterious, and threatening. Ultimately, myths, scandals, and public fear have become inseparable from Freemasonry's cultural identity. The craft's secrecy, symbolic richness, and historical influence make it a fertile subject for rumor, conjecture, and sensationalism. Yet these same elements also preserve its moral, philosophical, and fraternal mission, ensuring that the lessons of the lodge, virtue, brotherhood, and personal growth continue to reach initiates while captivating the imagination of the outside world. The enduring legacy of public fear and myth demonstrates a crucial paradox. Secrecy protects and inspires, yet it also provokes suspicion. The more the craft has hidden, the more the world has speculated. In the end, Masonry scandals are as much a reflection of society's curiosity, fear, and imagination as they are of the fraternity itself. This duality, revered, feared, and misunderstood, has shaped the way the world perceives Freemasonry, creating a mystique that endures across centuries, ensuring that the craft remains an object of fascination, debate, and relentless inquiry. As the world entered the 20th and 21st centuries, Freemasonry faced challenges unlike any it had encountered before. Industrialization, mass communication, secularization, and global conflict transformed societies, shifting public perceptions and altering the context in which the fraternity operated. No longer confined to small, local communities, Masonry had to navigate a rapidly changing world, balancing tradition and secrecy with transparency, relevance, and social responsibility. Its survival and adaptation in this modern era offer a compelling story of resilience, reinvention, and the enduring power of ritual and fraternity. Modern Freemasonry continues to honor centuries-old traditions. Ritual, symbolism, moral instruction, and the bonds of brotherhood remain central. Initiates still progress through degrees, learn the meaning of symbols, and take oaths that emphasize personal integrity, service, and virtue. Yet the context has evolved. Technology allows lodges to communicate and organize on a scale unimaginable to earlier generations, while global networks link members across continents. The principles of Masonry, moral guidance, education, and service are now applied in an interconnected, multicultural world. Public perception, however, remains a delicate issue. In the age of instant information, secrecy often provokes curiosity and suspicion. Conspiracy theories persist, fueled by sensational media, novels, and films. Yet these perceptions are counterbalanced by transparency initiatives. Lodges now participate openly in charitable projects, community service, and public education about the craft. Masonic charities, scholarship programs, and civic initiatives highlight the fraternity's enduring commitment to societal improvement, demonstrating that secrecy need not equate to subversion. One notable development in modern Freemasonry is the increasing inclusivity of co-masonry and female lodges. While traditional lodges remain male-only in many regions, women's lodges have gained recognition and respect, and some jurisdictions have embraced mixed lodges. These developments reflect broader societal trends toward gender equality and social inclusion, allowing the fraternity to extend its teachings of virtue, moral reflection, and community service to a wider audience. The result is a richer, more diverse Masonic culture, still rooted in ritual and allegory but adapted to contemporary ethical norms. Global events, such as world wars, economic crises, and political upheavals, tested the fraternity's cohesion and adaptability. Lodges served as spaces for mutual support, networking, and moral reinforcement. Members, bound by shared principles, could rely on each other for guidance, resources, and camaraderie. These networks demonstrated that Masonry's lessons, discipline, ethical conduct, and service were not merely symbolic but practical tools for navigating turbulent times. Even in regions where Masonry was suppressed or restricted, the fraternity persisted, often operating discreetly to maintain continuity. Technology has also transformed the way Masonry is practiced and perceived. Virtual lodges, online educational resources, and digital communications extend the reach of the craft, allowing members to study rituals, discuss philosophy, and maintain fraternal bonds across great distances. Social media and online platforms also provide avenues for public education, countering misinformation and demonstrating Masonry's commitment to charity, ethics, and personal development. These tools allow the fraternity to maintain relevance while preserving the integrity of ritual and secrecy. Despite modernization, Freemasonry continues to face scrutiny. Authoritarian regimes in various countries have viewed lodges as subversive, sometimes banning the fraternity or persecuting members. Religious authorities in some regions remain wary, concerned about secrecy, ritual, or moral influence. Even in democratic societies, curiosity and suspicion linger, fueled by media portrayals and historical scandals. The challenge for modern Masonry is to navigate these perceptions while remaining true to its core values of virtue, education, and fraternity. Charity remains a cornerstone of modern Masonic identity. Lodges worldwide engage in philanthropic projects, funding hospitals, schools, scholarships, and disaster relief initiatives. These activities demonstrate that Masonry's influence is constructive, aiming to improve communities rather than dominate them. Through service, the fraternity translates centuries-old moral teachings into tangible, positive outcomes, countering myths of clandestine power with evidence of practical good. Education, mentorship, and moral development are also central to contemporary practice. Lodges offer lectures, study groups, and discussion forums, emphasizing ethics, personal growth, and civic responsibility. Initiates learn not only the traditional rituals but also the application of Masonic principles in modern life. Integrity in business, fairness in civic affairs, and compassion in community service. This combination of ritual and real-world guidance ensures that Masonry remains a living, evolving institution rather than a relic of the past. Modern Masonry also grapples with the tension between secrecy and relevance. The fraternity's mystique, built over centuries, attracts interest, but excessive opacity can alienate potential members and provoke misunderstanding. Lodges balance these pressures by revealing enough to educate and inspire without compromising ritual integrity. Public ceremonies, open houses, and educational outreach help dispel myths, while private rituals continue to provide initiates with the transformative experience central to the craft. In a globalized society, Freemasonry has also emphasized international cooperation and dialogue. Grand lodges across continents communicate, share rituals, and coordinate charitable efforts. These networks reflect the fraternity's core values of fraternity, moral development, and civic responsibility on a global scale. The universality of Masonic principles, ethics, service, personal growth, transcends borders, fostering a sense of shared purpose among members worldwide. The modern era also invites reflection on Masonry's enduring relevance. In a world often characterized by cynicism, polarization, and ethical ambiguity, the fraternity offers a framework for moral reflection, community engagement, and personal development. Its rituals teach patience, symbolism, and ethical reasoning. Its networks foster trust, collaboration, and mentorship. Its charitable activities translate principles into action. In this sense, Masonry remains not only a guardian of tradition but also a guide for navigating contemporary moral and social challenges. Ultimately, modern Freemasonry is a story of adaptation and resilience. It preserves centuries-old rituals, symbols, and teachings while embracing new forms of communication, social inclusion, and public engagement. The craft demonstrates that secrecy and tradition can coexist with transparency, relevance, and ethical leadership. By balancing these elements, Masonry continues to shape lives, communities, and, in subtle ways, the broader course of society. The lesson of modern Freemasonry is that mystery and moral guidance are not mutually exclusive. Ritual, symbolism, and fraternity provide continuity and meaning, while adaptation, transparency, and social engagement ensure that the craft remains vibrant and relevant. In the end, the modern era proves that Freemasonry's influence endures not because it dictates events from behind closed doors, but because it shapes character, inspires service, and cultivates virtue in a complex, interconnected world. Freemasonry's long-standing secrecy, rich symbolism, and historical influence have made it a natural target for conspiracy theories. From the earliest anti-Masonic pamphlets to modern internet speculation, the fraternity has been portrayed as a shadowy force shaping world events, controlling governments, or hoarding forbidden knowledge. Popular culture, in books, films, and television, has both reflected and amplified these ideas, transforming Masons into figures of intrigue, suspicion, and endless fascination. Understanding these portrayals sheds light not only on public perception but also on society's enduring fascination with hidden power. The roots of conspiracy theories about Masonry lie in a mix of truth and imagination. Freemasonry's secrecy, its system of degrees and rituals, and its network of influential members are real. Yet the interpretations and extrapolations of these facts often veer into exaggeration. Observers, unable to access inner workings, filled gaps with speculation, creating narratives in which Masons manipulate global events, control finance, or orchestrate revolutions. While historical evidence for such centralized control is scant, the persistence of these ideas speaks to the human tendency to imagine hidden forces behind complex phenomena. In literature, Masonry has long provided fertile ground for mystery and intrigue. Gothic novels of the 18th and 19th centuries frequently depicted secret societies, coded rituals, and conspiratorial networks. Writers such as Sir Walter Scott and Victor Hugo wove Masonic motifs into their works, emphasizing secrecy, symbolism, and hidden influence. These stories capitalized on public curiosity while embedding Masonic ideas into cultural consciousness. Masonry's visual symbols, pillars, compasses, and checkerboard floors became shorthand for hidden knowledge, instantly recognizable yet enigmatic, enhancing suspense and narrative tension. The 20th century brought Masonry to film and television, where its mysterious aura was amplified. Movies like National Treasure and series such as Da Vinci's Demons portray Masons as keepers of ancient secrets, manipulators of history, or guardians of powerful artifacts. These portrayals often blur fact and fiction, combining historical events, ritualistic imagery, and imaginative storytelling. While entertaining, such depictions reinforce public perception of Masonry as a secretive and omnipotent society, even if real-world influence is far subtler. Popular culture also emphasizes symbolism as a vehicle of hidden power. The all-seeing eye, pyramids, and cryptic inscriptions appear repeatedly in novels, films, and video games. Creators use these symbols to evoke mystery, authority, and conspiracy, drawing on the public's familiarity with Masonic imagery. Even when detached from actual Masonic practices, these symbols signal hidden knowledge, power, and intrigue, cementing the craft's association with mystery and speculation. The Internet age has accelerated the spread of Masonic conspiracy theories. Blogs, forums, and social media amplify claims of global networks, clandestine agendas, and occult influence. Video documentaries, viral posts, and speculative podcasts explore alleged links between Masons and world events, economic systems, or secret governments. While these narratives often lack substantiated evidence, their popularity reflects enduring human fascination with secrecy, hierarchy, and hidden influence. The allure of uncovering forbidden knowledge taps into curiosity, fear, and the desire for narrative order in a complex world. Religious and political contexts have historically shaped Masonic conspiracy theories. In some regions, authorities portrayed Masons as heretical, immoral, or subversive, emphasizing secrecy as evidence of malevolent intent. In others, political rivals accused members of manipulating elections, orchestrating revolutions, or promoting hidden agendas. These narratives often combine partial truths, real Masonic influence in networking, philanthropy, or civic engagement, with speculative extrapolation resulting in stories that are part history, part myth. Conspiracy theories often amplify the significance of high-profile members. Historical figures who were Masons, from George Washington to Winston Churchill, are sometimes depicted as agents of hidden agendas, their actions reframed as evidence of coordinated influence. While members were guided by Masonic principles, the actual extent of coordinated control over historical events is minimal. Yet this tension between visibility, secrecy, and influence fuels both fascination and suspicion, keeping the narrative alive in public imagination. Masonry's portrayal in popular culture also emphasizes ritual and ceremony. Initiation rites, secret handshakes, and mysterious regalia are dramatized to heighten suspense and intrigue. In films and novels, these elements are often exaggerated, creating an aura of arcane power and mystique. The dramatization of ritual serves both narrative and psychological functions. It engages the audience, evokes curiosity, and reinforces the perception that the fraternity operates according to hidden laws and knowledge inaccessible to outsiders. Paradoxically, conspiracy theories and media portrayals have sometimes enhanced Masonry's public image. By presenting the craft as mysterious and influential, they attract new members curious about the hidden knowledge, symbolism, and moral philosophy of the fraternity. Lodges leverage public fascination to promote charitable work, educational outreach, and cultural engagement, demonstrating that even myths and speculation can have tangible benefits for the organization. Masonic symbols in public spaces, architecture, and cultural artifacts continue to fuel speculation. From the checkerboard floors in civic buildings to the use of the all-seeing eye on currency, observers interpret these elements as evidence of secret influence. While most uses are symbolic or decorative, the repeated presence of familiar imagery reinforces the sense of hidden continuity and the idea that Masonry has shaped society in subtle, enduring ways. Ultimately, the intersection of Freemasonry and popular culture reflects broader human psychology, a desire to find hidden patterns, to imagine order in complexity, and to tell stories that combine mystery, morality, and power. Conspiracy theories, novels, films, and visual symbols allow people to explore these ideas safely, engaging with the fascination of secrecy while questioning authority and human influence. Masonry, with its rituals, networks, and symbolism, provides the perfect canvas for these explorations. In conclusion, the portrayal of Freemasonry in popular culture and conspiracy narratives illustrates the enduring tension between visibility and secrecy. The fraternity's real influence, moral guidance, fraternal bonds, philanthropy is often overshadowed by imaginative interpretations of power and hidden agendas. Yet these stories, myths, and dramatizations ensure that Masonry remains a subject of intrigue, fascination, and speculation. Symbols, rituals, and legends combine to create a narrative that captivates the public imagination, proving that mystery, more than fact, often sustains the craft's cultural resonance. Beneath the layers of secrecy, ritual, and public speculation lies the true heart of Freemasonry, its emotional and philosophical core. The fraternity is not merely a network of influence or a collection of symbols. It is a structured journey of moral development, self-reflection, and personal growth. For initiates, each ritual, each symbol, and each lesson serves a purpose: to challenge the mind, cultivate virtue, and guide the heart toward ethical and meaningful living. While outsiders often focus on secrecy or conspiracy, members experience a transformative process designed to leave an indelible mark on character and conscience. At the center of Masonic philosophy is the belief in moral and spiritual improvement. The rituals of initiation are more than theatrical performances. They are carefully constructed allegories. Walking through symbolic trials, the initiate confronts the consequences of ethical lapses, the responsibilities of civic life, and the potential for personal transformation. Each degree presents a progression, teaching lessons about honesty, charity, humility, and the pursuit of knowledge. This structured moral education is a cornerstone of Masonic identity, shaping behavior both inside and outside the lodge. Symbols are integral to this process. Tools like the square and compass, the plumb line, and the level serve as more than decorative motifs. They are instruments for contemplation. The square reminds members to live uprightly, measuring actions against a standard of virtue. The compass teaches moderation and self-restraint, guiding desires and ambition. Checkerboard floors, pillars, and celestial imagery offer reflections on duality, balance, and the greater universe, connecting the individual's moral journey to broader philosophical and spiritual truths. For the initiate, these symbols are mental touchstones, providing daily guidance for ethical decision-making. Freemasonry also emphasizes fraternity and emotional connection. Brotherhood is more than social camaraderie. It is a support system that reinforces moral development. Members witness each other's struggles, share experiences, and offer counsel, creating a network of accountability and encouragement. This emotional support fosters resilience, empathy, and ethical reflection, reinforcing lessons learned during ritual and study. In essence, Masonry teaches that moral and personal growth occurs not in isolation, but within a community committed to shared ideals. Philosophically, the craft encourages contemplation of life's mysteries and moral questions. Initiates are urged to reflect on mortality, purpose, and the nature of virtue. Lodges provide a space for dialogue, debate, and meditation, blending ritual, symbolism, and intellectual inquiry. By exploring ethical dilemmas, human behavior, and the consequences of choice, members cultivate discernment, patience, and wisdom. This philosophical aspect distinguishes Masonry from mere fraternal or social organizations, grounding it in the pursuit of moral and spiritual excellence. Charity and service are essential extensions of these lessons. Masonic teachings insist that moral development is inseparable from action in the world. Philanthropy, volunteer work, and civic engagement are not optional. They are the practical embodiment of the fraternity's values. Members learn that virtue is measured not only by personal conduct, but by contribution to society, reinforcing a connection between moral reflection and tangible impact. This emphasis on service transforms philosophical principles into real-world behavior, strengthening the emotional and ethical fabric of both individual and community. The emotional resonance of ritual is profound. Initiates often describe feelings of awe, humility, and introspection during ceremonies. The deliberate use of space, symbolism, and sequence creates psychological emotion, allowing members to internalize lessons viscerally. This emotional engagement enhances the effectiveness of philosophical teaching, ensuring that concepts of virtue, responsibility, and self-improvement are felt as well as understood. In this way, Masonry bridges intellect and emotion, reinforcing ethical principles through lived experience. Secrecy, often misunderstood by outsiders, serves an important psychological and philosophical function. By restricting knowledge of certain rituals and symbols to initiates, Masonry heightens focus, encourages reflection, and fosters trust. The experience of learning and discovery is gradual, creating a sense of achievement and personal transformation. This layered approach teaches patience, diligence, and respect for process, qualities that extend beyond the lodge into personal and professional life. Masonry also engages with the universal human quest for meaning. Questions of morality, mortality, and purpose are central to ritual and discussion. Initiates confront allegorical challenges that mirror real-life ethical dilemmas, encouraging introspection and self-improvement. By framing these lessons in symbolic and philosophical terms, the craft provides a structured environment for exploring life's profound questions, offering guidance without prescribing rigid dogma. This flexibility allows members to integrate Masonic principles with personal beliefs, creating a deeply individualized moral framework. Art, architecture, and symbolism contribute to the emotional and philosophical core as well. Visual motifs, columns, celestial imagery, and geometric patterns serve as meditation tools, guiding the mind toward reflection on virtue, order, and balance. Music, ceremony, and spoken word reinforce ethical lessons, creating a multisensory environment that deepens emotional and intellectual engagement. This synthesis of art and philosophy ensures that Masonic teachings resonate on multiple levels, leaving a lasting impression on members' minds and hearts. Ultimately, the emotional and philosophical core of Freemasonry is what sustains the fraternity through centuries of change, controversy, and myth. Beyond symbols, rituals, and historical influence lies a living, dynamic system of moral education, personal growth, and communal support. Members are shaped not by external power, but by internal transformation, learning to navigate life with integrity, empathy, and purpose. This inner journey, though hidden from outsiders, is the essence of Masonry and the source of its enduring relevance. By guiding initiates through reflection, ritual, and ethical practice, Freemasonry nurtures character, fosters resilience, and cultivates a sense of meaning. The fraternity's blend of philosophy, symbolism, and emotional engagement ensures that lessons are not merely intellectual but deeply felt, encouraging members to live virtuously in both private and public life. This is the quiet, profound power of Masonry, a system designed to refine hearts, strengthen minds, and connect individuals to something greater than themselves. In the end, the emotional and philosophical core of Freemasonry explains its longevity and mystique. While secrecy, symbols, and public speculation capture attention, the true legacy lies in the transformation of members, how ritual, reflection, and fraternity shape character, inspire action, and cultivate enduring moral insight. It is here, in the inner life of the lodge and the hearts of initiates, that Freemasonry's most profound and lasting influence can be found. As we reach the final chapter of this exploration, it becomes clear that Freemasonry's power lies not only in its history, symbols, or famous members, but in the enduring mystery it cultivates. The craft is a tapestry woven from centuries of ritual, philosophy, and secrecy, threaded with stories of influence, scandal, and wonder. Even today, lodges maintain their rituals, networks, and principles, offering both initiates and outsiders a glimpse into a world that is at once familiar and unknowable. It is this duality, the tension between revelation and secrecy, that sustains fascination and invites reflection. The allure of Freemasonry rests on its ability to balance the seen and unseen. Symbols, ceremonies, and architecture speak to those within, guiding moral development, ethical reflection, and personal growth. To outsiders, these same elements evoke curiosity, speculation, and awe. This interplay between internal meaning and external perception has defined Masonry across centuries. The square and compass, the all-seeing eye, pillars, and checkerboards remain not just aesthetic or ritualistic elements, but conduits of imagination, connecting human desire for understanding with the lessons of virtue, discipline, and fraternity. Perhaps the most striking aspect of the craft is its resilience. Despite centuries of suspicion, political suppression, scandals, and public myths, Freemasonry continues to thrive. Lodges exist on every continent, rituals endure with only minor adaptations, and members still find moral guidance, fellowship, and purpose within its structures. This persistence suggests that the craft fulfills a deep human need, a structured path toward personal growth, ethical reflection, and connection to a community of shared ideals. Even in a modern world characterized by rapid change and skepticism, Masonry offers a space for contemplation, discipline, and virtue. The enduring mystery is amplified by secrecy. While the fraternity is more transparent than ever before, through public education, charitable works, and media presence, the rituals and inner workings remain protected. This intentional concealment is not about manipulation or subversion, but about preserving the transformative power of discovery. Initiates experience lessons incrementally, creating a journey of revelation that engages intellect, emotion, and spirit. For the observer, this secrecy evokes curiosity and speculation, ensuring that Masonry retains its aura of wonder and intrigue. History, too, plays a vital role in sustaining fascination. From medieval guilds to Enlightenment thinkers, from revolutionary leaders to celebrated artists, Freemasonry has intersected with human events at pivotal moments. These historical connections lend weight to the fraternity's mystique, offering tangible evidence of its influence while leaving space for imagination. The stories of famous Masons, scandals, and public perception form a rich narrative, a bridge between fact and myth that continues to captivate scholars, enthusiasts, and casual observers alike. Yet beyond mystery and history lies a more intimate aspect, the personal reflection inspired by the craft. Freemasonry encourages contemplation of mortality, purpose, ethics, and human connection. Through ritual, symbolism, and communal experience, members confront questions that have long preoccupied philosophers and seekers. How should I live? What is my duty to others? What is the meaning of virtue? These questions are timeless, and the craft provides a structured environment in which to explore them thoughtfully, fostering moral insight and emotional depth. Charity and service remain central to this reflection. Masonic teachings insist that ethical development is inseparable from action in the world. Lodges support hospitals, schools, disaster relief, and scholarships, translating abstract principles into tangible good. By integrating personal growth with societal contribution, Masonry demonstrates that virtue is lived, not merely contemplated. This fusion of philosophy, ritual, and action ensures that the fraternity's influence is enduring, meaningful, and visible even beyond the lodge walls. Modern engagement further underscores Masonry's relevance. Through education, mentorship, and global networks, the fraternity continues to cultivate character, civic responsibility, and ethical reflection in a contemporary context. Rituals are preserved, yet adapted. Symbols retain meaning while inviting fresh interpretation, and networks of fraternity support members in navigating complex, modern challenges. The craft's ability to remain both timeless and adaptable contributes to its enduring mystery, ensuring that each generation encounters it as simultaneously ancient and alive. Ultimately, the enduring power of Freemasonry is paradoxical. Its secrecy, symbols, and rituals inspire awe and curiosity, yet the true impact lies in moral and personal development. Influence is subtle, ethical rather than coercive, and primarily concerned with shaping character rather than controlling events. The interplay of myth, history, and lived experience creates a layered narrative, one in which fact and imagination coexist, and where mystery serves not as manipulation but as a catalyst for reflection, learning, and wonder. The craft invites reflection not only on the fraternity itself but on human nature, our desire for connection, meaning, and moral order. It reminds us that mystery can be a tool for growth, that symbols can teach, and that fraternity can transform both individual lives and broader communities. In this sense, Masonry is less about secrets hidden from the world than about truths discovered within, less about power wielded in shadows and more about virtue cultivated in light. As we conclude this journey, one question lingers. What if the lessons, symbols, and reflections of Freemasonry change the way we see history, society, and ourselves? The answer is not given in conspiracies or sensationalist accounts, but in the quiet impact of ethical instruction, personal reflection, and communal bonds. The craft's power is enduring precisely because it operates on a human scale, shaping character and conscience, inspiring action, and inviting contemplation in ways that transcend time, culture, and circumstance. In the final analysis, Freemasonry's mystery is not a veil to obscure influence, but a mirror reflecting human aspiration. It challenges us to consider what it means to live ethically, to connect meaningfully with others, and to engage with the world thoughtfully. Its symbols, rituals, and history are tools for reflection, guiding us to examine our choices, understand our responsibilities, and embrace the possibility of moral growth. The enduring legacy of the craft is thus both tangible and intangible. Its buildings, symbols, and charitable works mark its presence in the world. Its philosophical teachings, rituals, and emotional resonance shape the inner lives of those who engage with it. The mystery persists because it is inseparable from the journey of discovery, the personal and communal path that Masonry offers to every initiate. For the outsider, it remains an object of fascination. For the member, it is a guide for life. In the end, Freemasonry leaves us with wonder, reflection, and a quiet call to introspection. Its secrets are less about concealment and more about prompting thought, guiding action, and inspiring moral and personal growth. The craft endures not because of power wielded in darkness, but because of character shaped in light, lessons learned in ritual, and ideals carried forward in everyday life. Its mystery is timeless, its influence subtle yet profound, and its invitation universal, to explore, to reflect, and to live with virtue and purpose.